Miss Maddie. She goes, it's Madeline.
What's her last name?
Clifton.
How old is she?
She's 8 years old.
Where was she playing at around the
Right around the house here. She had on a pair of shorts and a red t-shirt.
When's the last time anybody saw her?
4:30 to 5 o'clock. About 5:30 was the last time we saw her. And I was letting the kids play out here for a little while, and then she disappeared.
It was 1 week after Maddie Clifton had gone missing when Missy Phillips discovered the 8-year-old's body under her son's waterbed. She would never be just any mom again. In an internet blog written several years ago, she recalls praying to die on the spot.
Yes, I did. And I sometimes still do. I try not to. I mean, so many of my friends keep saying it's not your fault. In fact, Josh is the one who told me so many times, Mom, it's not anything you did do. It's not anything you didn't do. It's not your fault.
And then she's also from across the street. Oh my gosh.
Late in the afternoon on November 3rd, 1998, in the quiet Lakewood neighborhood of Jacksonville, Florida, an 8-year-old girl suddenly vanished into thin air. The entire country held its breath, watching one of the largest search operations in the region's history unfold. Right in the middle of it all, you'd see a 14-year-old neighbor, a boy with sad eyes, tirelessly going door to door handing out flyers to help find her. But what truly sends chills down my spine is the dark secret hidden right underneath his waterbed. Why would a good kid commit an act that completely defies all human logic? What I found in the investigation files and witness testimonies we're about to explore will make you seriously question the safety of. There are thousands of true crime files sitting in police archives across the country, but the 1,998 case of Maddie Clifton has always stood out to me. What struck me here was the sheer psychological complexity of what happened. I didn't just want to open this file to recount another tragedy. I wanted to understand it. Because this case isn't just a simple story of a missing child. It is a chilling, complex portrait of the razor-thin line between a tragic mistake and a deeply malicious crime. It forces us to ask a very uncomfortable question. How well do we actually know the people living right across the street? Before we get into the timeline, we need to talk about the people involved, starting with Maddie, in the Lakewood neighborhood of Jacksonville, Florida. Maddie was known as the local bright light. She was 8 years old, full of energy, and absolutely loved sports. But what really defined her was her heart. Maddie was the kind of kid who would never, ever let anyone be lonely. If she saw another child sitting by themselves, she was the first one to walk over, introduce herself, and pull them into the game. She was essentially the healing energy of the entire block. Meanwhile, living right across the street from the Clifton family was a 14-year-old boy named Joshua Phillips. By all accounts from neighbors and teachers, Joshua was just a quiet, obedient teenager. He kept to himself, played with his pets, never got into trouble at school, and seemed like a perfectly normal, unassuming kid. You have these two completely opposite personalities, the outgoing, compassionate little girl and the withdrawn, quiet teenager. And this is important, because nobody could have ever predicted that their paths were about to intersect in the most devastating way imaginable. And then, the afternoon of November 3, 1998, changed everything. It was a typical Tuesday in Lakewood. The neighborhood was the kind of tight-knit, safe community where kids ran around freely until the streetlights came on. Around 5 p.m., Maddie was doing exactly what she loved, hitting golf balls outside with the neighbors. About an hour and a half later, dinner was ready. Maddie's mom, Sheila, stepped out onto her front porch. The sun was going down, casting that late afternoon glow over the street. Sheila called out, just like she did every single night.
Maddie, it's time for dinner. Jesse's already inside. Where are you?
She waited for the familiar sound of small footsteps running up the driveway. But there was nothing. Just the quiet rustle of the Florida evening. Her 11-year-old sister, Jessie, came to the door, looking a little confused.
Mom, I didn't see her over by the golf area, Jessie said. She said she was going to get more golf balls earlier, but she never came back.
At this point, reviewing the case files and putting myself in that exact moment, I started feeling that creeping, suffocating anxiety. And, you see, Maddie was not the kind of kid who just wandered off. She was never late for dinner. A child who is always responsive, always around the house, suddenly doesn't answer, which means something was fundamentally wrong. The silence on that suburban street wasn't just peaceful anymore. It was heavy. It was the final moment of peace, before a storm that would shatter this community forever. So, what happens when a child vanishes in a neighborhood where everyone knows everyone? Absolute chaos. By 6:30 p.m., the eerie silence of the afternoon had shattered into full-blown panic. Maddie's mother dialed 911, and within hours, Lakewood transformed from a quiet residential suburb into a massive search grid. We are talking about hundreds of volunteers, police dogs sniffing through the local woods, the National Guard checking every dumpster and storm drain, and helicopters spotlighting the streets from above. The community rallied together like one big family desperately looking for their own. At the same time, standing right there in the middle of this frantic search party, was 14-year-old Joshua Phillips. He didn't just watch from his living room window. He eagerly joined the crowds. He was out there in the dark, handing out missing person flyers, looking deeply worried, and asking people if they had seen his little friend. Looking back at the case files now, it is absolutely chilling to realize the perfect facade this teenager was hiding behind. Meanwhile, while Joshua was putting on the performance of a lifetime, the police were focusing their attention somewhere else. In cases like this, investigators always look at the last person to see the victim alive. Because of that, they quickly zeroed in on a man who lived just 5 doors down. His name was Larry. Larry was an older neighbor who had been practicing his golf swing with Maddie right before she disappeared. The problem is, Larry wasn't just a friendly neighbor, he had a criminal record involving some highly concerning charges from decades prior. During that very first night, investigators brought him in and pressed him hard. You can practically feel the tension in the room. "You were the last person playing golf with her, right?" the detective demanded. "Which way did Maddie go?" Larry, his voice trembling under the intense pressure, replied, "I swear, she just said she was out of balls and ran home to get more. I waited out there for 15 minutes, but she didn't come back. So I went inside. I didn't do anything to her." The thing is, the police didn't buy it. They asked him to take a polygraph test to prove his innocence. And here is where the case takes a massive, shocking turn. Larry failed it. The machine indicated he was being deceptive, even though he continuously begged them to take his DNA and swore he was innocent. What I found was that this completely derailed the investigation. But it also makes you wonder about the psychology of the suspect. Did the polygraph actually catch a liar? Or was this just the terrified, erratic physical reaction of a man who knew his dark past made him the perfect scapegoat? What do you guys think about this detail? Do you think the lie detector machine simply got it wrong? Or do you think Larry was actually hiding some other dark secret from his past that had absolutely nothing to do with Maddie's disappearance? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because this single moment cost the police precious time. For 6 agonizing days, the community searched everywhere. And then, the horrific truth finally surfaced, not from a police dog or an FBI profiler, but from the most unexpected person imaginable, Joshua's own mother, Missy. It was a normal morning, and Missy was doing what any mom does, cleaning her 14-year-old son's messy room. She noticed a weird wet spot on the floor near his waterbed. Thinking it was a simple leak, she started pulling at the electrical tape holding the broken frame together. She reached underneath, trying to find the source of the dampness, and her hand brushed against something small and ice cold. It was a foot. In a state of absolute, blinding terror, Missy sprinted out of her house, waving down the first police officer she saw stationed near the Clifton family's home.
Gasping for air, she cried out, "Please, please come with me. There's something in Joshua's room. I saw a foot. Little Maddie. I think she's under my son's bed."
The officer immediately stepped forward.
"Ma'am, calm down. Are you absolutely sure? Show me the way right now."
When investigators entered that bedroom, the reality of the situation was almost too dark to process. What struck me here was not just where Maddie was found, but how the room was deliberately arranged. Joshua had completely surrounded his bed with air fresheners, burning incense, and deodorizer sprays. He had been comfortably sleeping on that bed every single night for a week, casually masking the scent of the unthinkable secret right beneath him. What do you guys think about this specific behavior? Does setting up air fresheners sound like the ongoing panic of a scared child? Or is it a sign of a terrifying, cold-blooded apathy? Drop your thoughts in the comments. By the time Joshua was pulled out of his middle school class and interrogated, he had a story ready. He claimed the whole thing was a tragic accident. According to him, they were playing baseball in his backyard, and he accidentally hit Maddie right in the eye with the ball. She started screaming, terrified that his notoriously strict, intimidating father would come home and beat him for breaking the house rules. Joshua panicked. He said he dragged her inside and silenced her just to stop the crying. The problem is, the physical evidence completely destroyed his story. Here is the massive shock factor. The medical examiner found absolutely no bruising on Maddie's eye. There was no baseball injury. Investigators checking his computer logs discovered that Joshua had been watching violent adult pornography just half an hour before Maddie's death, and he went right back to watching it shortly after the crime. The thing is, if you accidentally hit a little kid with a baseball, your immediate human reflex is to scream for an adult. If you were sitting in the jury box, seeing the lack of a black eye and that chilling computer history, or do you believe this was a calculated, premeditated nightmare? Let me know your theories below. Let's pause the timeline for a second and dive into the why. Because to understand how a 14-year-old boy could do something so undeniably unthinkable, we have to look closely at the shadows inside his own home. What I found was, when you read through Joshua's police interrogation transcripts, he only ever gave one concrete reason for his alleged sudden panic. He was absolutely terrified that his father would come home, find out he broke the house rules, and severely beat him. We really need to dissect this psychology for a moment. Joshua was living under the same roof as an alcoholic, volatile father who enforced his authority through physical violence. When a child grows up in that kind of incredibly volatile environment, their brain is literally hardwired for survival. They exist in a permanent state of red alert, constantly trapped in a psychological fight-or-flight response. And this is important, because in that crucial, terrifying moment in his bedroom, the overwhelming fear of his father's incoming wrath completely overrode whatever humanity, logic, or empathy Joshua had left. To his underdeveloped teenage brain, Maddie was no longer a little friend who needed help. She suddenly became a liability that was going to get him physically punished. To protect himself from his father's rage, his distorted defense mechanism chose the darkest, most brutal path imaginable, eliminating the witness. The reason this matters is that it forces us to look at the much bigger picture. How many children out there right now are living behind closed doors in that exact same toxic environment? Domestic violence doesn't just create traumatized victims. In the absolute worst case scenarios, it actively molds cold, apathetic perpetrators. When fear and physical violence are the only languages spoken at home, kids learn to survive by any means necessary. They learn to meticulously hide their mistakes, to lie without a second of hesitation, and ultimately, they learn to use violence themselves to solve their problems. Which tells us we desperately need a societal wake-up call about the dangers of discipline through fear. Ruling a household through sheer terror creates a ticking time bomb. As parents, we have to build family environments where children feel safe enough to admit when they've messed up, rather than resorting to extreme, horrifying cover-ups out of pure panic. Furthermore, society and schools need a much stronger safety net to identify those quiet, withdrawn kids who are silently suffering from mistreatment at home before that hidden trauma tragically turns outward. Before we move on to the courtroom battle and the controversial trial that followed, if you appreciate these psychological deep dives into the cases that changed our world, please take a quick second to hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel grow, and it allows us to keep bringing you these in-depth, respectful investigations. Now let's look at what happened when the justice system had to figure out what to do with a 14-year-old killer.
Josh shot this home video of Jessica and Maddie 1 year before Maddie's murder.
Whoever that is, his arms.
Did Maddie and Josh hit it off?
So, what happens next? The community had their suspect in custody, the police had a confession, and the case moved swiftly into the courtroom. But almost immediately it collided with a massive legal and moral controversy. The state made the highly aggressive decision to charge 14-year-old Joshua Phillips with first-degree murder and try him as a fully grown adult. This sparked a fierce debate right out of the gate. On one hand, the nature of the crime was undeniably horrific and calculated, demanding strict and uncompromising justice. But at the same time, the defendant was literally a middle schooler who couldn't even legally drive a car. Can a 14-year-old truly possess the exact same level of criminal culpability as an adult? The problem is, if anyone was expecting a long, drawn-out legal battle full of complex psychological testimonies and fierce debates, they were incredibly disappointed. The trial was shockingly fast. It only lasted a couple of days, and the defense's strategy, or rather the sheer lack of it, was absolutely baffling. This is the part I couldn't get past. Joshua's defense attorney called absolutely zero witnesses to the stand. He barely mounted a defense at all. But what really stands out is the crucial evidence they completely ignored. Behind the scenes, there were medical brain scans available that allegedly showed physical damage to Joshua's frontal lobe. And this is important because the frontal lobe is the exact part of the human brain responsible for impulse control, logical reasoning, and empathy. If your entire defense relies on the argument that your teenage client panicked under the shadow of an oppressive father and didn't know how to process a high-stress situation, wouldn't neurological proof of brain damage be your absolute strongest piece of evidence? Yet, for reasons that still confuse legal analysts today, those scans were sidelined. They were never effectively presented to the jury, which means the jury essentially only heard one clear narrative, the prosecution's timeline of a cold-blooded, calculated killer. After less than 3 hours of deliberation, the verdict was swift and decisive. Joshua was found guilty of first-degree murder. From there, the judge handed down the harshest sentence available, life in prison without the possibility of parole. To the victim's grieving family, and to a terrified community, this felt like the only appropriate justice for such an unforgivable act. He had stolen an innocent 8-year-old girl's entire future, so he had permanently forfeited his own. However, sending a 14-year-old away to die in a concrete cell also planted the seeds for a massive constitutional debate that would echo through the American justice system for decades. Does locking away a juvenile forever, without any hope of rehabilitation or a second chance, violate the basic rights of a child? It was a harsh sentence that officially closed the book on the tragedy in 1999. But as time went on, it became very clear that the legal system wasn't entirely done with Joshua Phillips. For over a decade, it seemed like the book was permanently closed on this tragedy. Joshua was serving life without parole, and the community was desperately trying to navigate their grief. But then, the legal landscape completely shifted. In 2012, the United States Supreme Court made a landmark ruling. They decided that handing down mandatory life sentences without the possibility of parole to juvenile offenders was unconstitutional. The core argument was that teenagers have a unique developing brain capacity for change. Because of that ruling, the heavily guarded doors of the courtroom swung wide open once again. Fast forward to 2017, and Joshua Phillips, now a grown man in his 30s, was granted a resentencing hearing. What happened next forced Maddie's family to step right back into the absolute worst days of their lives. When Joshua walked into that courtroom, his defense team painted a picture of a completely transformed human being. They presented a man who had spent almost 2 decades being the ultimate model prisoner. He had earned multiple educational certificates, kept a perfectly clean disciplinary record, and even told the court that if he were ever released, he just wanted to live a quiet, peaceful life as a monk. On paper, he looked like the absolute pinnacle of the prison rehabilitation system. And then came the moment everyone had been holding their breath for. For the very first time since the 1998 murder, Joshua took the stand to publicly apologize to Maddie's family. He pulled out a lengthy, pre-written letter and began to read it aloud. But the problem is, when you strip away the tears and actually analyze the specific words he chose to use, the entire apology becomes incredibly unsettling. This is the psychological shock factor that I really need you to pay attention to. In an apology that was supposed to be dedicated to a stolen 8-year-old girl, Joshua spent an overwhelming amount of time talking about himself. He stood up there and said things like, "I have become quite intimate with suffering." He talked at length about how he had seen many dark things and had been to dark places. He even detailed how he almost took his own life multiple times just to escape his own guilt and despair. What I found was a masterclass in self-pity. Instead of focusing entirely on the immense permanent void he created in the Clifton family, he centered his own emotional trauma. In forensic psychology, constantly making yourself the victim and centering your own experiences are classic narcissistic traits. Think about the sheer audacity of standing before a family whose child you killed and detailing your own personal growth. While Joshua was safely behind bars taking classes and finding his inner peace, Maddie never got to go to high school. She never got to graduate, fall in love, or grow up. Her timeline was permanently frozen at 8 years old. Yet Joshua was using this courtroom stage to essentially narrate his own coming-of-age story. And this is important. I really want to know what you guys think about this. How do you feel about this specific apology? Do you look at his clean prison record and hear the sincere remorse of an enlightened man who truly grew up and realized the horror of his actions? Or do you think this heavily scripted, self-centered speech was just a psychological manipulation tactic, a display of narcissism specifically designed to win over a judge and get a reduced sentence? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments, because this moment deeply divided everyone watching the trial. We've walked through the frantic searches, the baffling trial, and the chilling psychology of this entire tragedy. But as I finally close this enormous heavy case file, my mind keeps getting stuck on one specific thing. What haunts me the most after reviewing all of this isn't just how the killer acted, or the undeniable brutality of the crime itself. It's the cruel, suffocating silence of it all. Think about it. It started with the deafening silence of domestic trauma, a teenage boy too paralyzed by fear to speak up about what was happening behind the closed doors of his own home. And that unresolved, unspoken trauma eventually mutated into the terrifying silence of an 8-year-old girl's body, hidden directly under a waterbed for 7 days, completely muted while an entire community screamed her name right outside the window. When a tragedy of this magnitude strikes a tight-knit, safe community, our natural human instinct is to look for a boogeyman hiding in the shadows. We desperately want the villain to look like a villain. But the most unsettling takeaway from this case, and the reason it stays with you long after the video ends, is that evil doesn't always look like a monster. Sometimes, darkness takes the shape of a quiet, polite, well-behaved kid living right next door, walking his dog and doing his chores. It teaches us that we can never afford to ignore the smallest psychological changes in the kids around us. If a child suddenly becomes withdrawn, or if a home environment is ruled entirely by fear and physical punishment, those aren't just minor behavioral quirks. They are massive red flags. We have to look closer before that silence turns into something we can't reverse. The reason this matters is that the justice system is a living, breathing entity, and the law always has loopholes and gray areas. Back in 1999, the courts decided that a 14-year-old who committed this level of violence was completely beyond saving and locked him away forever. Decades later, the Supreme Court shifted its stance, ruling that a developing juvenile brain deserves the opportunity for redemption. So, I have to pass the question to you. What do you guys think? Is 25 years in a prison cell enough of a price to pay for completely stealing the future of an innocent 8-year-old girl? Or do you believe that some crimes are so inherently evil and destructive that they permanently forfeit the perpetrator's right to a second chance? Let me know your stance in the comments, because there is truly no easy, universally accepted answer here. As it stands today, Joshua Phillips' life continues to move forward. He earns certificates, he files legal appeals, and he navigates the court system for resentencing hearings, holding tightly to the hope of one day walking out of those prison gates. But for the Clifton family, time permanently stopped on November 3rd, 1998. The immense, unbearable weight of their grief eventually tore Maddie's parents apart, leading to their divorce. And her older sister, Jessie, had to go through the agonizing daily process of learning how to set the family dining table with only 3 plates instead of 4. She later admitted it took her years to stop automatically grabbing that 4th plate out of the cupboard. The legal files on this horrific case might be technically closed, and the judge's gavel has long since struck. But the devastating void at that dinner table is permanent, and the deep invisible wound left on the quiet streets of Lakewood that will never truly heal.
Whoever has my children, that they please bring them home.
Plead to the American public that you please do not give up on these 2 little boys in the search for their return safe home to us.
Red light, and just out of nowhere, this black guy came up, and we just opened the door and jumped in the car, and he had a gun, and he had it pointed in my side and told me to drive, and so I did. And when I tried to ask him why he was doing this or whatever, he just told me to shut up or he'd kill me. So I just kept driving. My babies were in the back seat and they were crying. And I tried to tell him everything was gonna be okay. He told me to get out, and I said, well, can I get my children? And he said no. He said, I don't have time for that. I do understand why they're having to do what they're doing. I'm all they have. Right now, they have not been able to rule anyone out. I don't think I'm any more of a suspect than anyone in this case right now.
9 days later, there was shock and anger when it was revealed the 23-year-old mother had strapped her children in their car seats and sent them to a watery grave.
It was a frigid November night when the dark, murky waters of John D. Long Lake finally gave up their horrifying secret. As the heavy tow cable tightened, a red 1,990 Mazda Protege slowly breached the surface. The crowd of investigators standing on the muddy bank held their breath. Inside the submerged vehicle, perfectly strapped into their car seats, were 3-year-old Michael and 14-month-old Alex. For 9 agonizing days, the entire nation had been hunting a phantom, a ruthless carjacker who allegedly stole the vehicle with the boys still inside. But as police wiped the mud from the windows, a chilling realization set in. The kidnapper they were looking for didn't exist. The nightmare was only just beginning. The 25th of October 1994. The small, close-knit town of Union, South Carolina, was wrapped in the quiet chill of an autumn evening. Most families had already locked their doors and settled in for the night. But the peaceful silence of the neighborhood was violently shattered by the sound of frantic, relentless pounding on the front door of a local residence. It wasn't just a casual knock. It was the chaotic, desperate hammering of someone fighting for their life. Standing on the porch under the dim porch light was 23-year-old Susan Smith. She was hyperventilating, tears streaking down her flushed face, her entire body trembling with what looked like unimaginable terror. As the door swung open, Susan could barely catch her breath to articulate the horror she had allegedly just survived. She spun a terrifying tale straight out of a parent's darkest nightmare. Susan claimed she had been stopped at a red light at a deserted intersection when an unidentified black man, armed with a gun, suddenly yanked open the passenger door and forced his way into her burgundy Mazda Protégé. She reported that he pressed the weapon against her side, demanding she drive. After miles of terror, he forced her out of the vehicle on a desolate stretch of rural highway, but the car wasn't empty. Still strapped tightly into their car seats in the back were her two young sons, 3-year-old Michael and 14-month-old Alex. Susan claimed she begged the gunman to let her get her babies out, but he coldly replied that he didn't have time, speeding off into the pitch-black night and taking her entire world with him. Pure panic instantly consumed the house. The neighbor rushed to the telephone, her hands shaking as she dialed 911, while Susan collapsed in a heap of hysterics in the living room. The raw audio from that emergency dispatch call remains absolutely blood-chilling.
Yeah, there's a lady who come up that door, and some guy jumped into a red light with her car, with her two kids in it, and he took off, and she got out of the car here at our house.
And he's got the kids?
Yes, ma'am, in her car. And she's real hysterical, and I just decided I need to call the law and get them down here.
Get them going, Pam. I got two kids.
Within minutes, the piercing wail of sirens shattered the night as a swarm of police cruisers descended upon the quiet street. Chaos ensued. Roadblocks were hastily erected across the county, and a frantic, all-hands-on-deck manhunt was launched. The atmosphere was thick with a suffocating, community-wide dread. I gotta be honest with you, when you hear a mother screaming for her babies like that, your first instinct is to help. You don't question it. You feel her terror in your own chest, and you do whatever it takes to bring those boys home. Little did they know, they were being dragged into a sinister web of lies.
Her two small boys crying in the back seat. About each plea and home video, Susan knew all along.
By the very next morning, the terrifying story of the carjacked toddlers had exploded far beyond the borders of Union, South Carolina. The entire nation was paralyzed with shock, collectively holding its breath for little Michael and Alex. A massive, unprecedented search operation was immediately launched. The FBI was called in, establishing hotlines that rang endlessly with tips from across the country. Search dogs scoured the dense, rural woods, while helicopters swept over endless highways and desolate lakes. Thousands of ordinary citizens and volunteers flooded the streets, distributing flyers bearing the innocent faces of the two missing boys. The whole country was on high alert, hunting for a phantom suspect, a black man in a beanie, stoking a terrifying paranoia that had everyone looking over their shoulders. As the days dragged on with absolutely no sign of the children, the media circus reached a fever pitch. Satellite trucks lined the quiet neighborhood streets, transforming the small, tight-knit town into the epicenter of a national tragedy. It was into this glaring spotlight that Susan and her estranged husband, David Smith, stepped forward. Although their marriage had been crumbling and they were separated, they stood side by side, presenting a united, desperate front to the world. But if you looked closely behind the scenes, a profoundly chilling contrast was beginning to emerge, one that investigators would later zero in on. David was a broken man. He was visibly shattered, his posture slumped, his eyes hollowed out by pure, unadulterated agony. He looked exactly like a father whose heart had been violently ripped out of his chest. Susan, however, was playing a deeply disturbing game. Raw, unedited footage from a news station captured a moment that is practically impossible to stomach once you know the truth. While the crew was setting up the lighting before the formal broadcast began, Susan was caught standing next to her utterly traumatized husband. She wasn't sobbing. She wasn't trembling with fear. Instead, she was looking around at the equipment with wide-eyed excitement, even letting out a giddy giggle, seemingly reveling in the sudden attention and the thrill of being on television. Yet, the absolute second the brilliant camera lights flicked on and the reporter gave the countdown, a terrifying switch flipped inside her. The giddy excitement vanished, instantly replaced by the trembling, tear-streaked mask of a grieving mother. The cameras rolled, broadcasting her desperate plea into millions of living rooms across America.
I want to say to my babies that your mama loves you so much, has my children, that they please bring them home.
Take the time to plead to the American public that you please do not give up on these two little boys in the search for their return safe home to us. That you continue to look for this car, these two, our children, and for the suspect himself, that you continue to keep your eyes open, and anything that you see that might would help to please call and let it be known. We ask that you continue to pray for me and my wife and for our family, but most of all that you continue to pray the American public, continue to pray for Michael and Alex, that they are returned home safely to their mother and father and the family members who love them so much, that you pray most of all for them and that they are being taken care of and that they are safe and that they will return home safely.
She sat there, holding her devastated husband's hand, staring into the camera, and lied to the entire world. Does this make your blood boil too? While the American public poured out their hearts and resources for the devastated young mother, seasoned investigators were quietly shifting their crosshairs. Behind closed doors, Susan's perfectly rehearsed narrative was rapidly unraveling. Detectives began meticulously retracing her timeline, and almost immediately, glaring red flags started popping up everywhere. First, there was the mechanics of the intersection itself. Susan adamantly claimed she was forced to stop at a red light on Monarch Mills Road late at night. However, local traffic engineers confirmed that the light was triggered by sensors. It wouldn't have remained red at that hour unless there was active cross-traffic, making her extended wait at an empty intersection practically impossible. Furthermore, when crime scene units scoured the exact location where she claimed she was violently shoved from the hijacked vehicle, they found absolutely nothing. There were no frantic tire marks on the asphalt, no scuff marks in the dirt, and no signs of a physical altercation. Susan herself didn't have a single scratch, bruise, or torn piece of clothing to corroborate being forcefully pushed onto the pavement. The physical evidence, or rather, the glaring lack of it, was deafening. To either clear her name or confirm their worst fears, investigators asked Susan to submit to a polygraph test. She failed. Thinking it might just be the nerves of a grieving mother, they administered a second one. She failed that one too. The walls were rapidly closing in on her. Finally, on the 9th day of the agonizing nationwide search, the authorities decided the charade had to end. Sheriff Howard Wells, a respected local lawman who actually had a personal connection to Susan's family, brought the 23-year-old into a sterile, windowless interrogation room for a final confrontation. He systematically dismantled her fabricated story, confronting her with the failed polygraphs and the impossible timeline. Then, he dropped the ultimate bombshell, a masterstroke that completely trapped her. He revealed that undercover narcotics officers had been actively staking out that exact intersection on the night she claimed the abduction took place. They had eyes on the road the entire time. There was no struggle. There was no black man with a gun. There was no carjacking. Cornered, with the crushing weight of her own lies suffocating her, the fragile facade finally cracked. In a moment of sheer desperation, she asked Sheriff Wells to pray with her. He obliged, bowing his head in the tense, heavy silence of the interrogation room. As the prayer ended, the atmosphere shifted. The game was over. Sheriff Wells.
Susan, I know you're lying. The story doesn't add up. He looked straight into her eyes, his voice steady, carrying the weight of the undeniable truth. Susan, it is time. Susan dropping her head, sobbing. You don't understand. My children are not all right.
This is where the story takes a dark turn. The carjacker was a ghost. The monster they were looking for was the mother herself.
Susan Smith has been arrested and will be charged with 2 counts of murder in connection with the deaths of her children.
Following her chilling confession, Susan directed authorities to the exact spot she had tried so desperately to hide, the desolate boat ramp at John D. Long Lake. This brings us right back to that horrifying moment on the muddy bank. Under the harsh, blinding glare of police floodlights, the tow truck's winch groaned as it slowly dragged the red 1,990 Mazda Protégé from the suffocating, murky depths. When the water poured out of the shattered windows, the worst fears of an entire nation were fully realized. Michael and Alex hadn't been taken by a violent stranger. They had been trapped in their own family car, perfectly strapped into their car seats, waiting for a mother who was never coming back to save them. The details that emerged from the autopsy and subsequent investigation are completely devastating. The medical examiner confirmed a brutal truth. The boys didn't die before the car hit the water. They were fully alive, conscious, and terrified as the freezing lake water violently rushed into the cabin. According to the timeline pieced together by investigators, as Susan parked on the steep incline of the boat ramp, sensing something was terribly wrong in the dark, 3-year-old Michael looked up and innocently asked, "Mommy, where are we going?" She didn't answer him. Instead, she coldly stepped out of the vehicle, reached back inside to shift the gear into neutral, release the parking brake, and shut the door. As the heavy car rolled down the concrete ramp and plunged into the black water, drifting for several feet before finally sinking, Susan didn't scream. She didn't dive in to break the glass. She simply turned her back, walked up the embankment, and vanished into the night, leaving her own flesh and blood to slowly drown in absolute darkness. But the tragedy of Susan Smith didn't end at the edge of that lake. The collateral damage of her sinister lie ripped the entire community apart. By specifically fabricating a story about a black man carjacking her at gunpoint, Susan deliberately weaponized racial prejudice to meticulously cover her tracks. For 9 agonizing days, the black community in Union, South Carolina was subjected to a living nightmare. Law enforcement aggressively scoured the streets, pulling over innocent black men, subjecting them to intense interrogations, and treating everyday citizens like child murderers. She ignited a dangerous racial firestorm, exploiting historic tensions and casting a dark shadow of unwarranted suspicion over countless innocent people, all to protect her own twisted secret. Imagine being David, finding out the woman you were comforting on TV actually stood by a lake and watched your babies drown. How do you even begin to recover from a betrayal like that?
I think it takes a very sick and emotionally unstable person to be able to take 2 beautiful children like that, to be able to keep them from their parents.
Anguish and anger swept the close-knit community of Union, South Carolina. Susan Smith, after all, had grown up here. When she reported her children kidnapped, many felt as if their own children were missing.
Stuff like that don't happen here. It's just...
Would you believe it?
Yeah. Everybody believed her.
I did.
Well,
My body got something wasn't right from the beginning.
The central question that haunted investigators, the media, and the shattered community was simple, yet entirely unfathomable. Why? What could possibly drive a 23-year-old mother to commit such an unspeakable act against her own flesh and blood? When detectives began digging into Susan Smith's personal life, peeling back the layers of her carefully crafted facade, they didn't find a woman suffering from a sudden psychotic break. Instead, they uncovered a chillingly selfish motive, deeply rooted in lust, greed, and a desperate obsession with social climbing. Susan's marriage to David Smith had been extremely tumultuous, marred by infidelity, emotional manipulation, and endless financial struggles. But Susan already had her eyes fixed on a permanent way out. She had been carrying on an intensely passionate, clandestine affair with a man named Tom Finley. Tom wasn't just anyone. He was the wealthy, handsome son of the prominent owner of the textile mill where Susan worked. For Susan, Tom represented everything she desperately craved: money, elevated social status, and a glamorous escape from her mundane, working-class life in Union. She was completely infatuated, heavily convinced that he was her golden ticket to a brand new, affluent lifestyle. There was only one massive problem. Tom didn't want the baggage. Just days before the horrific murders took place, Tom had decided to officially end their romance. He sent Susan a devastating Dear Jane letter that would later become one of the most damning pieces of evidence in the entire investigation. In the handwritten letter, Tom was brutally honest about his reasons for breaking it off. He explicitly wrote, "I do not want children, and I don't want the responsibility of your children either." For a normal, loving mother, a letter like that would simply mean the end of a toxic relationship. You pack up your pride, hug your kids a little tighter, and move on. But Susan's mind operated with a terrifying, twisted logic. She didn't view Tom as the problem. She viewed 3-year-old Michael and 14-month-old Alex as the burdensome obstacles standing between her and the lavish life she believed she deserved. In her sinister calculation, if the children were permanently removed from the equation, Tom would welcome her back with open arms. If you ever find yourself trying to rationalize her actions, thinking that perhaps this was a tragically botched suicide attempt or a split-second moment of overwhelming panic, the physical evidence pulled from the murky depths of John D. Long Lake proves otherwise. This wasn't a sudden mental collapse. It was a methodical, cold-blooded house cleaning. When crime scene investigators popped the trunk of that submerged red Mazda, they made a discovery that sent shivers down the spines of even the most hardened detectives. Stuffed inside the trunk, completely soaked in muddy lake water, was Susan's white wedding dress and the wedding photo album from her marriage to David. She wasn't just getting rid of her kids in a moment of despair. She had meticulously packed up the physical remnants of her past, treating her marriage and her children like disposable garbage to be tossed into a watery grave. She was systematically erasing her entire family history so she could walk away with a clean slate for her wealthy lover. What struck me the most was the sheer calculation of it all. Packing her wedding dress into that trunk shows this wasn't a frantic, panic-driven move. She chose a guy over her own flesh and blood. Drop your take in the comments. Am I missing something? Or is this pure evil? By July 1995, the sleepy, quiet town of Union, South Carolina had been completely overrun. The local courthouse was violently besieged by thousands of reporters, satellite trucks, and camera crews from across the globe. It was an absolute media frenzy. Journalists were literally renting out storefronts, camping on sidewalks, and even hiding in the trees just to catch a glimpse of the woman who had been officially dubbed the most hated mother in America. Inside the sweltering courtroom, the tension was suffocating. Lead prosecutor Tommy Pope didn't hold back for a single second. He went straight for the death penalty. Pope's argument was sharp, aggressive, and devastatingly clear. Susan Smith acted with pure, unadulterated malice aforethought. She made a cold, calculated decision to eliminate her children for her own selfish desires, and she deserved the exact same ultimate punishment that the phantom carjacker would have received had he been real. But Susan's defense team aggressively tried to flip the script. They launched a highly controversial strategy to whitewash her horrifying actions, attempting to transform the cold-blooded killer into a tragic, sympathetic victim. They paraded psychologists to the stand who testified that she suffered from chronic depression and was experiencing a severe mental breakdown. Then came the ultimate bombshell, meant to manipulate the jury's empathy. Her own stepfather took the stand and openly admitted to committing unspeakable acts against Susan when she was a teenager. The defense blatantly used her deeply troubled past, her trauma, and her emotional instability as a protective shield, arguing that she was a broken, suicidal woman who simply snapped under the pressure. The prosecution, however, was ready to shatter that manipulative illusion. The absolute climax of the trial, a moment that remains one of the most chilling sequences in true crime history, came when Prosecutor Pope introduced a grueling experimental simulation video. He didn't want the jury to just hear about the deaths. He wanted them to see, feel, and experience exactly what 3-year-old Michael and 14-month-old Alex endured in their final, terrifying moments. The footage showed a camera placed inside the cabin of a similar Mazda protege as it was rolled down the exact same steep boat ramp into the murky waters of John D. Long Lake. As the video played, the courtroom fell deadly silent. The jury watched in sheer horror as the dark water violently breached the floorboards, rapidly rising over the seats. You could physically see the jurors gasping, some unconsciously holding their breath and wiping away tears as they were forced to view the suffocating reality from the perspective of the trapped, helpless toddlers. After intense deliberations, the jury finally returned their verdict. They found Susan Smith guilty on 2 counts of murder. However, swayed by the defense's emotional manipulation regarding her traumatic past, they spared her from the electric chair. Instead, they sentenced her to life in prison. At the time, the jury firmly believed they were sending her away forever to rot in a concrete cell and think about the beautiful lives she maliciously stole. But they were intentionally kept in the dark about a massive legal technicality. Under South Carolina law, in 1995, a life sentence didn't actually mean life without the possibility of release. It meant the inmate would become eligible for a parole hearing after serving exactly 30 years. No one could have predicted what happened next. That loophole in her life sentence would rip the family's wounds wide open 30 years later. Fast forward 3 agonizing decades. The year is 2024. If Michael and Alex had lived, they would be grown men in their early 30s today, perhaps starting families, building careers, and living the full lives they were so violently robbed of at 3 years and 14 months old. Instead, November 2024 marked a terrifying milestone for the Smith family. Because of that devastating legal loophole from her 1,995 sentencing, 53-year-old Susan Smith officially became eligible for parole. The nightmare David thought he had survived was violently resurrected, threatening to release the monster back onto the streets. You would think that spending 30 years locked in a concrete cell for murdering your own flesh and blood would force a person to reflect, to genuinely change, and to find some ounce of profound remorse. But remember exactly who we are dealing with. Susan Smith's prison record was an absolute, undisputed train wreck. Her time behind bars proved that she hadn't rehabilitated. She was the exact same cold, calculating manipulator she was in 1994. When her disciplinary file was exposed to the public, it painted a sickening picture. She had been repeatedly disciplined for possessing contraband, self-mutilation, and severe protocol violations. But the most damning evidence of her unchanged, toxic nature was her exploitation of prison staff. Susan used her infamy and manipulation to engage in illicit, intimate relationships with multiple corrections officers. One of them, a high-ranking security captain, completely ruined his life for her. Because of his involvement with Susan, he lost his career, was sentenced to 5 years of probation, and was forced to register on a mandatory offender list for the rest of his life. Even in a maximum security prison, Susan was still solely looking out for Susan, destroying the lives of anyone foolish enough to get caught in her orbit. When her highly anticipated parole hearing finally arrived, Susan appeared before the board via video link, and in a moment that felt sickeningly familiar, she turned on the exact same theatrical performance she used to fool the world 30 years ago. She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. She sniffled. She claimed she loved Michael and Alex with all her heart and begged the board for God's mercy. It was the same crocodile tears, the same twisted victim mentality, but standing in stark contrast to her hollow, pathetic performance was David Smith. For 30 grueling years, this father had carried an unimaginable, crushing grief. He had battled through dark depressions and overwhelming pain just to stay alive for this exact moment. He walked into that hearing room with a photo of Michael and Alex proudly pinned to his lapel, making absolutely sure the parole board had to look right into the eyes of the true victims. David didn't mince his words. He delivered a fierce, unflinching, and heartbreakingly powerful statement. He reminded the board that this wasn't some tragic accident or a fleeting mistake. Susan made a deliberate, conscious choice to end his children's lives. He looked the board members in the eyes and pleaded with them not to let her out, not today, not ever. The parole board didn't need long to see right through Susan's fabricated facade. After a mere 40 minutes of deliberation, they returned with a swift and absolute hammer blow to her hopes of freedom. The vote was a 100% unanimous decision. Parole denied. There would be no second chance. There would be no walking free. Susan Smith was immediately stripped of her delusions. The screen faded to black, and she was sent right back to her cell where she belongs. Finally, After 30 years of unimaginable pain, justice stood firm. David could breathe a little easier knowing the woman who murdered his boys wasn't walking free. What do you guys think? Does this ending bring you any sense of relief? I'll keep digging if there's more to uncover. If you want to support the channel and see more deep dives into cases like this, please hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching and for all the comments, you guys make this worth it.
She's alive. What? Your daughter's alive? Yeah. You're sure? I'm positive. You're like, swear on your life. I swear on my life.
Hit his daughter after she had had an accident in the car. She also said that he put Harmony's body in bags and coolers and over the next few months moved them to several different locations until March 2020 when he finally rented a U-Haul to dispose of the girl's remains. Adam Montgomery is awaiting trial on murder charges. Harmony's body has never been found.
It's New Year's Eve, 2021. An officer knocks on the window of a car parked in a freezing New Hampshire lot. He wakes the man inside to ask a simple question. Where is your 5-year-old daughter? The man doesn't blink. He swears on his life she's perfectly fine. But here is the chilling part. Nobody has seen this little girl in 2 whole years. And what investigators are about to uncover inside a canvas duffel bag will break the entire country's heart. So, how does a child just vanish into thin air while the system looks the other way? Imagine a mother desperately trying to reach her 5-year-old child. It's Easter 2019. Crystal Sorey is looking at her daughter Harmony through the screen on a brief FaceTime call. She didn't know it then, but that was it. That was the very last time she would ever see her little girl's face. From there, a terrifying wall of silence went up. Every single time Crystal reached out to Adam Harmony's biological father, who had somehow been granted full legal custody, she hit a brick wall. Her calls went straight to voicemail. Her texts were completely ignored. When she was blocked on social media, she even created fake profiles just trying to get around his block, desperately hoping to see a new photo, just to see if Harmony was okay. But Adam shut her out completely. He started telling social workers that Harmony had gone back to Massachusetts to live with Crystal. Meanwhile, he told Crystal absolutely nothing. And this is important. A 5-year-old child just vanished from the face of the earth, and the system didn't even blink. No school reported her absent because she was never enrolled. No doctor noticed missed appointments. For 2 whole years, little Harmony Montgomery fell through a massive, fatal hole in the system. Have you ever wondered how a child barely old enough to tie her shoes can just disappear for 24 months without a single agency noticing? Do you think this is just a tragic oversight or a system built to fail the most vulnerable? Let me know your thoughts down below. Because of that systemic failure, the silence dragged on until late 2021. At that point, Crystal's desperation reached an absolute breaking point. She was calling everyone she could think of Child Protective Services, the mayor's office, the local police, literally begging someone, anyone, to physically locate her baby. Finally, the Manchester police realized the severity of the situation and officially opened a missing person investigation. What happened next was a frantic race against the clock. Investigators started looking for Adam only to find his last known address completely abandoned. The family was a ghost. But eventually, on New Year's Eve, December 31st, 2021, they tracked him down. They didn't find him in a house. They found him sleeping inside a car in a freezing parking lot in Manchester, alongside his new girlfriend, Kelsey Small. The officers knock on the glass. They wake him up. They aren't trying to arrest him right then. They just want a welfare check. They need to know this little girl is safe. The body cams are rolling, and this exact chilling exchange is caught on tape.
Hey, keep your hands where I can see them. What's going on? It seems a little strange that you don't want to tell us where she is.
All right, I got nothing else to say to you guys. She's alive. What? Your daughter's alive? Yeah. You're sure? I'm positive. You're like, swear on your life. I swear on my life. When's the last time you saw her alive? You know that she's fine. Like, you can assure me that she's alive. I know she's fine. All right, look, I have nothing else to say, guys. I really don't. I have nothing else to say to you guys. But you can tell me, like, Dad, you can look me right in the eye and tell me that she's alive. She's alive. Dude, if nobody has seen her in like 2 years, they're saying, like alive. Like, I talked to your family. Nobody's even seen her either. Your family. I know they're all down in Florida. They're concerned too, man. Like, I talked to like your brother, talked to your uncle, talked to your grandma. We talked to a lot of people, man. I'm not just fucking around with this. Like, all right. So like, you understand? Like, people stopped you. Like, they had us come out from the office. Like, all right. Like, I need to know that you saw your daughter alive recently. I'm not under arrest, and I would like to go. That's it.
What struck me here was how easily he lied. He didn't hesitate. He looked a cop in the eye and swore on his life, knowing exactly what was inside that duffel bag. The thing is, when you watch that footage, he doesn't look like a frantic, confused father. He looks annoyed, which tells us we are dealing with a deeply disturbing level of psychological manipulation right from the start. So, how did we even get here? How does a man sleeping in a freezing car, lying through his teeth to the police, get full legal custody of a vulnerable 5-year-old girl in the first place? To understand that, we have to rewind to a Massachusetts family courtroom in February 2019 and look at the fatal flaw in the entire system. At that time, Harmony's biological mother, Crystal Sorey, was battling severe substance addiction. Because she was struggling to get clean, Harmony had been placed in the foster care system. And this is important. Harmony was actually doing incredibly well there. She was placed with a foster family who completely adored her. They provided a stable, safe, and deeply loving home, and they genuinely wanted to adopt her. Imagine the absolute heartbreak of those foster parents, watching this sweet, resilient child who was legally blind in one eye and needed specialized care being packed up and taken away. The problem is, the family court system often has a dangerous blind spot when it comes to biological parents. Adam Montgomery walked into that courtroom with a terrifying criminal record. He was a career criminal with a documented history of armed robbery, assault, and even shooting a man in the face during an illicit transaction. Yet, the judge somehow looked past his extensive, violent rap sheet. Because Adam wasn't actively failing a substance screening at that exact moment, the judge stripped custody from the recovering mother and granted him sole custody. Just like that, Harmony was handed over to a violent felon. From there, she was moved across state lines to Manchester, New Hampshire, to live with Adam and his new wife, Kayla. Almost immediately, the environment turned toxic. The house on Guilford Street became a hub of chaos, and Child Protective Services, DCYF, was called multiple times. What happened next is the part I simply couldn't get past. In July 2019, Adam's own uncle, Kevin, who was living in the house at the time, witnessed the horrific violence firsthand. He saw the physical toll it was taking on Harmony and confronted his nephew directly.
When you saw her in the kitchen, how did she look to you?
She had a black eye.
Can you describe it for us? How did the black eye look?
Full, like a raccoon's eye, black and blue.
Black and blue?
Yes.
And when you say full, what do you mean by full? Can you give us a good
All the way around.
And what did Adam say?
She didn't do anything. I bashed her around the fucking house.
Did Harmony ever say anything in the response to the question, or just Adam saying, I bashed her around the fucking house?
I think just Adam.
How did...
He literally admitted it. He bashed a 5-year-old. Because of that, Kevin immediately called DCYF to report the mistreatment, hoping someone would finally step in and save her. But here is the ultimate tragedy. A caseworker actually showed up at the house. Instead of conducting a thorough investigation, they listened to Adam's pathetic lie. He claimed Harmony had just been accidentally hit in the face with a foam toy lightsaber while playing with her toddler brother. The agency bought it. They officially cleared the complaint and closed the file, turning their backs and leaving that little girl entirely unprotected. When the system hears a father admit to bashing his kid and still leaves her in his care, you have to ask, who is really to blame here? Do you think the judge should be held criminally responsible? Let me know down below. By early 2022, the investigation into Harmony's disappearance had hit an absolute brick wall. Adam Montgomery was completely stonewalling the police, refusing to answer questions, and demanding a lawyer. Investigators hoped they might get some answers from his new girlfriend, Kelsey Small, who had been living in the car with him. But in a bizarre and tragic twist, Kelsey was suddenly found dead in a hotel room from an apparent overdose. It was a massive red herring that took their only active lead and buried it. The trail went freezing cold. Meanwhile, detectives turned up the heat on Kayla Montgomery, Adam's estranged wife, and Harmony's stepmother. When first questioned, Kayla offered a very specific, neatly packaged cover story. She claimed the last time she saw the 5-year-old was right around Thanksgiving in 2019. According to her statement, Adam was driving her to work for her shift at Dunkin' Donuts. Harmony was sitting in the back seat. Adam supposedly told Kayla that after he dropped her off, he was going to drive Harmony down to Massachusetts to finally return her to her biological mother, Crystal. Kayla claimed that when Adam picked her up after her shift, Harmony was gone. She said she just assumed the drop-off went exactly as planned. It sounded plausible enough on the surface. The problem is, seasoned detectives don't just take your word for it. They pull the receipts. What I found absolutely fascinating here is how a 2-year, highly orchestrated cover-up completely unraveled over a mundane stack of paperwork. Investigators subpoenaed the employment records from Dunkin' Donuts to verify her timeline. And this is important. The records proved she was lying. Kayla hadn't worked a shift anywhere near Thanksgiving. In fact, she had been fired a full week prior for stealing money out of the cash register. That's when the entire case fractured. In June 2022, investigators bring Kayla back into the interrogation room. They slide the employment records across the table and finally back her into a corner.
That was the truth for when you worked at Dunkin' Donuts, but it was a lie for 2 days after Thanksgiving, right? You didn't work at Dunkin' Donuts 2 days after Thanksgiving.
Right.
And that was one of the lies that you got charged with.
Yes.
Okay. But you had lied before that, right? To the grand jury already.
Yes.
And then,
At this point, the dam breaks. Kayla realizes she is facing serious prison time for perjury, as well as welfare fraud because she had kept collecting food stamps for Harmony long after the little girl vanished. To save her own skin, she flips. She takes a plea deal with the state and agrees to become their star witness, finally shedding light on the horrifying reality of what happened to Harmony. But it makes you wonder about her true intentions. Do you think Kayla came clean out of actual guilt, or was she just a manipulative accomplice trying to save herself from prison? Let me know what you think in the comments. By late November 2019, the Montgomery family's living situation had completely deteriorated. They had been officially evicted from their Guilford Street home. From there, Adam, Kayla, and their 3 young children were forced to live entirely out of their car, a cramped Chrysler Sebring. They spent their nights sleeping in a freezing parking lot behind an apartment complex, completely off the grid. The environment inside that vehicle was intensely toxic and terrifying. Harmony, who was just 5 years old, was living in a constant state of paralyzing fear. Because of that fear, she actually stopped telling her parents when she needed to use the bathroom. Instead, she started having accidents directly in her car seat, and every single time she did, Adam's response was brutal physical violence. That brings us to the morning of December 7th, 2019. The family drove to a local clinic to receive their daily methadone doses. When Adam got back into the driver's seat after getting his dose, he immediately smelled urine in the enclosed car. Harmony had had another accident. That's when he completely lost his mind and flew into a blinding, violent rage. What happened next is honestly difficult to even comprehend. As Adam drove the family toward a nearby Burger King for breakfast, he began severely attacking his daughter. At every single red light they hit along the route, Adam would contort his body, reach over the center console into the back seat, and deliver heavy, closed-fist punches directly to his 5-year-old daughter's head. Kayla later testified that Harmony was crying uncontrollably at first, but as the savage beatings continued, over several intersections, the crying stopped. It slowly faded into a strange, hollow, unconscious moaning sound. And this is important. When Adam realized how badly he had hurt her, he didn't rush to a hospital. He didn't call 911. Instead, he pulled right into the Burger King drive-thru, calmly ordered food, and handed it out to the other kids. He then took a large comforter and tossed it over Harmony's badly bruised, dying body just to hide her out of sight while he ate his meal. When you hear that a father can brutally beat his child to the point of unconsciousness and then casually order fast food moments later, it truly makes you question the nature of pure evil. Do you think there is any possible rehabilitation for someone capable of this level of psychopathic detachment? Tell me what you think in the comments. Meanwhile, the family just continued to sit in the parking lot, getting high while Harmony slowly slipped away under that blanket. By the time the car eventually stalled out and broke down later that afternoon, Adam pulled the comforter back to check on her. It was too late. Harmony had taken her last breath. Before we move on to the sickening reality of how Adam chose to cover up this horrific crime, please take a quick second to hit that subscribe button. Your support is what allows us to keep shedding light on these deep dive investigations and fighting for victims like Harmony. When a tragedy like this happens, you expect a parent to break down. You expect panic, tears, or at the very least, a desperate call for help. But Adam Montgomery didn't shed a single tear. Instead, his mindset immediately shifted into a cold, calculated survival mode. What happened next reveals a level of psychological detachment that is incredibly hard to comprehend. With his 5-year-old daughter deceased in the backseat of their stalled vehicle, Adam didn't seek out the authorities. He simply walked to the trunk, pulled out a standard canvas duffel bag, and placed her inside, zipping it shut. Just like that, little Harmony was reduced to a piece of hidden luggage. He treated his own child not with the dignity she deserved, but as a problem to be tucked away. For the next 3 months, Adam carried that bag around Manchester in a deeply unsettling real-life game of hide-and-seek. Initially, he just concealed the bag in a freezing snowbank behind an apartment complex, placing it near a dumpster so no one would look twice. A few days later, when a friend let the family sleep in their Audi for the weekend, Adam casually tossed the duffel bag right into the trunk. From there, the family moved in with Kayla's mother, and this is where his audacity becomes truly chilling. Adam placed the duffel bag inside a standard red cooler. He then left that cooler sitting right out in the open in the public hallway of the building. Dozens of residents walk past it every single day, completely oblivious to the heartbreaking secret resting just inches away from them. Eventually, the family was relocated to a local family shelter, taking the bag with them. Adam actually climbed onto a bunk bed, the exact same bed where his other young children slept, and pushed the duffel bag deep into the ceiling vent. The problem is, you can't hide reality forever. As weeks passed, nature took its course, and a noticeable odor started seeping through the vents, prompting complaints from neighbors. Knowing a maintenance worker was scheduled to check the ceiling, Adam realized he needed to act fast. He pulled the bag down and took it into the tiny bathroom. Needing to downsize his terrible secret, he transferred her remains into an even smaller CMC diaper bag. It completely defies human logic that a father could handle the situation with such profound emotional emptiness. When you hear about someone moving a hidden bag from a snowbank to a public hallway, and eventually to a ceiling vent right above his sleeping kids, it leaves you speechless. Do you think someone is born with this level of extreme detachment, or is it a mindset they develop over time? Let me know your thoughts down below. Adam knew he couldn't carry that small diaper bag around forever. At this point, investigators pulled his financial history, and the bank statements revealed his ultimate endgame. What I found so striking was the timeline of his purchases. Records showed cash withdrawals at an ATM directly across the street from the Home Depot, where Adam worked. Soon after, he purchased 80 pounds of pelletized limestone, a power grinder, and a metal cutting diamond blade. In other words, he wasn't just hiding her anymore. He meticulously gathered the exact tools needed to permanently erase the evidence, ensuring that Harmony could never be brought home. By 2023, the wheels of justice were finally turning, but the first trial Adam Montgomery actually faced wasn't for Harmony's murder. It was for the stolen firearms. And this is important because it gave us a rare, chilling glimpse into his deeply manipulative mindset. Standing in front of the judge prior to his sentencing for the gun charges, Adam actually had the audacity to ask for leniency regarding his public image. He stated flat out on the record, "I did not kill my daughter Harmony, and I look forward to my upcoming trial to refute those offensive claims." He played the role of the wrongfully accused victim perfectly, without a single ounce of hesitation. Meanwhile, you would logically think that his estranged wife, Kayla, the woman who finally broke the case wide open and agreed to testify against him, would completely despise him. But what I found buried in the court proceedings was absolutely mind-boggling. Even after watching Adam beat a 5-year-old to death and spending months helping him drag her decaying body around town, Kayla submitted a letter to the court that was essentially a bizarre love letter to Adam. She admitted she wanted to see him one last time, maybe even be intimate with him, before betraying him on the stand. Psychological experts call this jail love, a deeply twisted trauma bond, where accomplices remain hopelessly devoted to their tormentors, completely disconnected from reality. It is incredibly hard to wrap your head around that level of toxicity. When you hear about a stepmother witnessing a child's murder and still writing love letters to the killer, it makes your blood run cold. Do you think Kayla was genuinely a brainwashed victim of severe cruelty, or a cold, calculating accomplice playing the legal system? Let me know your takedown in the comments. Fast forward to May 2024. Adam has officially been found guilty of second-degree murder, and the day of his sentencing has arrived. The courtroom is incredibly heavy. Crystal Sorey, Harmony's biological mother, finally gets to stand at the podium and look the monster in the eye. She tells him she wishes nothing but pain and misery for the rest of his pathetic life, asking if Harmony begged for him to stop. Through it all, Adam just sits there. He doesn't look up. He doesn't flinch. He shows absolutely zero emotion. But what happened next was a courtroom moment that truly leaves you speechless. The prosecutors had secured their conviction, but they were still missing the most important piece of the puzzle: Harmony's remains. They desperately wanted to bring this little girl home so her family could lay her to rest. So, they decided to pull a massive psychological stunt right there in front of the judge. The prosecutor looked directly at Adam and made an unprecedented on-the-spot offer. They told him that if he would just open his mouth right then and there and tell them exactly where he dumped that CMC diaper bag so they could recover her remains within 7 days, the state would drastically slash their sentencing recommendation. They were essentially offering to give him decades of his life back in exchange for one single location. Any normal criminal with even a shred of self-preservation would have jumped at that golden ticket. But Adam? He chose silence. He sat there completely mute. At this point, I started questioning what kind of dark satisfaction he was getting out of this moment. The prosecutor openly called him out, stating that Adam was once again choosing to be heartless, immoral, and unapologetic. Adam willingly chose to rot in a concrete cell rather than give Crystal the dignity of burying her child. For him, it was never about freedom. It was about holding on to the ultimate sadistic control. Because Adam Montgomery completely refused to cooperate or reveal where he dumped that diaper bag, the judge ultimately handed down a massive sentence. He was sentenced to a minimum of 56 years in prison, which essentially guarantees he will take his last breath behind concrete walls. But the most chilling and powerful moment of that entire sentencing hearing didn't come from the judge or the prosecutors. It came from Harmony's biological mother, Crystal Sorey. Standing just feet away from the man who murdered her little girl, Crystal delivered a tearful, devastating victim impact statement. She looked directly at Adam, who coldly refused to even make eye contact, and told him that she wished him nothing but pain and misery for the rest of his pathetic life. She demanded to know if her baby had cried for her, if she had screamed, or if she had begged him to stop. But because of his cowardly silence, Crystal will never get those answers. And this is important. It would be incredibly easy for us to just look at Adam Montgomery, label him a monster, and completely close the book on this tragedy. But doing that ignores the much darker, systemic reality of what really happened here. The reason this matters is that this case isn't just about the crimes of one depraved individual. It is a bloody, devastating indictment of the entire child welfare and family court system. Think about it. We are talking about a little girl who was legally blind in one eye and had special needs. She was highly vulnerable and needed absolute protection. Instead, a judge handed her over to a violent career criminal who had barely spent any time with her. When family members actively reported that she was being beaten and given black eyes, the protective agencies just accepted flimsy excuses and closed her file. What I found so deeply disturbing is that the system basically treated a disabled, defenseless 5-year-old child as if she were completely expendable. She was treated like a sacrificial lamb by a broken bureaucracy. Before we wrap up this tragic journey, if you appreciate these deep dive investigations where we look beyond the headlines to uncover the truth and hold the system accountable, please hit that subscribe button. Your support means everything and helps us ensure that victims like Harmony are never ever forgotten. So here we are. A monster is behind bars, but the most important question remains completely unanswered. Where is Harmony? At this point, I started questioning if we will ever truly know. Do you think Adam will eventually break his silence? Or will he take this sadistic secret to his grave? Let me know your thoughts in the comments.
For 27 years, we've been asking Who could take a 6-year-old boy and murder him and decapitate him? Who? We needed to know. We needed to know. And today we know. The not knowing has been a torture, but that journey's over. And a lot of horrible memories.
July 27th, 1981, 6-year-old Adam disappeared from a Hollywood mall. His head was found 2 weeks later, 125 miles away, in a canal west of Vero Beach.
I don't know who would do this to a 6-year-old child. I can't conceive of it.
I've been able to help so many victims of crime and their families. But for my family, there's been no justice.
It was supposed to be a quick trip to the mall on a bright Florida summer afternoon, but in just 10 minutes, a mother's world shattered and the landscape of American child safety changed forever. 6-year-old Adam was just playing a video game at Sears. Then, he vanished into thin air. A massive search ensued, but 14 days later, fishermen on the Florida Turnpike made a blood-chilling discovery, floating in the murky canal water. What started as a missing child case morphed into a twisted, horrifying nightmare involving a notorious serial killer, lost evidence, and a severely botched police investigation. The horrifying truth is, he was forced outside that store. No one could have predicted what happened next. It was July 27, 1981, in Hollywood, Florida. The kind of bright, carefree summer day where the biggest worry on a mother's mind was running a few simple errands. Reeve Walsh had brought her 6-year-old son, Adam, to the Sears store inside the bustling Hollywood Mall. Adam was wearing his favorite green shorts and a beige boat captain's hat, looking like a picture of innocence. He was a sweet, incredibly shy kid, deeply attached to his parents. Like most children that summer, he was captivated by the new Atari 2600 display setup right in the middle of the toy department. A group of older boys was already gathered around the screen, taking turns on the coveted game. Adam, fascinated, asked his mom if he could stay and watch while she looked for a lamp that was on sale. The lamp section was literally just 3 aisles away. It was a crowded store in the middle of the day, with security guards patrolling and a police station directly across the street. In an era long before parents worried about losing sight of their children for even a second, Reeve smiled and said yes. She promised she would be right back, but what no one knew was that those next 10 minutes would alter the course of American history. When Reeve returned to the toy aisle, just minutes later, the Atari display was completely empty. The older boys were gone, and Adam was nowhere to be found. At first, there was just mild concern. Reeve searched the immediate area, expecting to see his beige captain's hat popping up behind a rack of clothes. But as the minutes ticked by, that mild concern twisted into a suffocating, frantic panic. She ran to a store manager demanding answers. Store employees began paging Adam over the intercom, while Rev and her mother-in-law, who coincidentally was also shopping there, desperately scoured every inch of the massive department store. This is where the story takes a dark turn, uncovering a fatal chain of events that still haunts investigators today. According to police reports, a minor argument had broken out among the older boys at the Atari display. A 17-year-old security guard named Catherine Schaefer was called over to handle the disturbance. Instead of separating the kids or waiting for a parent, she made a decision that would change everything. In her statement to the police, she recounted those final moments.
I asked the older boys if their parents were there. They said no. The youngest one didn't say anything, so I told them all to leave the store.
Adam, paralyzingly shy and likely terrified of getting in trouble, never spoke up to say his mother was just a few aisles over. He was ushered out through a different exit, one he wasn't familiar with, leaving him alone outside the mall. When the Hollywood police were finally called at 1:55 p.m., almost 2 agonizing hours had passed. 2 hours of lost time? I gotta be honest with you, the thought of that little boy standing outside those doors, confused and waiting for his mom, breaks my heart. Does this kind of tragic misunderstanding make your blood boil too? Let me know below. The nightmare was only just beginning. The clock was ticking, but the urgency felt entirely one-sided. When the Hollywood Police Department finally arrived at the mall, the sun was still high, and there was still a very real chance to lock down the surrounding area. But that didn't happen. In 1981, The concept of a stranger abducting a child in broad daylight from a crowded public place was almost unimaginable to local law enforcement. Instead of sounding massive alarms, setting up roadblocks, or immediately treating it as a critical kidnapping, the initial response was agonizingly sluggish. Authorities largely viewed Adam as a lost child who had simply wandered off. Or worse, they classified the situation under the umbrella of a runaway. A 6-year-old boy terrified and alone does not simply run away from a toy aisle and vanish without a trace. I gotta be honest with you, it makes my blood boil to think about how much precious time was squandered in those critical first few hours, because the system simply didn't know how to handle a missing child. How would you feel if the people meant to protect your family just brushed off your worst nightmare? Let me know your thoughts below. As the sun began to set over Florida, casting long, dark shadows across the mall's parking lot, the devastating reality set in for John and Rev Walsh. Their little boy was out there in the dark, refusing to wait helplessly for a small-town police department to escalate the situation. John and Rev took matters into their own hands. They transformed their agonizing fear into frantic action, printing hundreds, and soon hundreds of thousands, of flyers. Adam's smiling face, captured in a recent photograph, wearing his little baseball uniform, was suddenly plastered on every storefront, telephone pole, and windshield across Broward County. The family even managed to scrape together a $100,000 reward.
I believe that somehow we'll reach the people that have Adam, and they'll realize that we don't want to hurt them, or we don't want to prosecute, and maybe they'll realize that, you know, how much hurt they've caused by taking Adam, and maybe they'll let him go somewhere.
At Hollywood Police Headquarters, detectives are trying to locate the woman who matches the composite drawing. Flyers about Adam are all over Dade and Broward counties and even Canada. Donations to help find Adam has grown to $120,000. Reva Walsh had a message for anyone who may have Adam in their custody.
We would donate any money they needed to help themselves or to help their problem. But we know Adam needs to be home, and Adam will never have a grudge against anyone that was kind to him.
Mel Taylor, Newswatch.
The local community rallied, conducting massive ground searches, but the chaotic nature of the investigation only added to the psychological torture. The tip lines began to ring, but the voices on the other end often brought nothing but cruel, false hope. People claimed to have seen suspicious vans, or a boy matching Adam's description in neighboring towns, sending desperate parents and under-resourced officers on exhausting wild goose chases. Every dead end was another dagger to the heart. By the second week, sheer desperation pushed the Walsh family onto the national stage as they tried to bypass the local red tape and reach the masses. On the morning of August 11th, 1981, a visibly shattered John Walsh appeared on Good Morning America, broadcasting his plea to millions of viewers. Fighting back tears, his voice trembling with a father's raw, unfiltered agony, he looked directly into the camera and said,
"He's our only child, he's a beautiful little boy, and we just want him back more than anything. We have hope, and we'll never give up hope, and we'll never stop searching."
They were doing everything humanly possible, clinging to the fragile belief that their innocent boy would somehow walk back through their front door. But little did they know, the nightmare was only just beginning. 14 agonizing days had passed since 6-year-old Adam vanished from the toy aisle. That's 2 full weeks of sleepless nights, relentless searching, and desperate prayers for John and Reeve Walsh. They had exhausted every lead and clung to every fragile shred of hope. But the tragic answer to their prayers wouldn't come from a ringing phone or a heroic police rescue. It would come from a desolate, quiet stretch of highway, nearly 130 miles north of their home in Hollywood. On the humid morning of August 10th, 1981, 2 men set out early for a peaceful day of fishing. They drove to a remote drainage canal running alongside the Florida Turnpike, right around mile marker 130, in Indian River County. The area was quiet, isolated, and surrounded by thick brush and dark, murky water. As they walked along the muddy bank, scanning the surface to find the perfect spot to cast their lines, one of the men noticed something pale bobbing in the water. At first glance, they desperately prayed it was just discarded debris or an old baby doll. But as they stepped closer, the horrific reality of what they had stumbled upon sent absolute chills down their spines. Panic-stricken, they rushed to contact the authorities. The chilling dispatch recording from the Indian River Police captures the exact moment the nightmare became undeniably real.
2 weeks after he vanished, fishermen found the boy's decapitated head in a canal more than 100 miles away. The rest of his body was never found.
The next of kin is being notified at this point in time.
When investigators arrived and secured the grim scene, they made a heartbreaking discovery that confirmed everyone's worst fears. Extensive dive teams scoured the difficult alligator-infested waters for days, desperately searching the surrounding area for any other signs of the little boy. But they uncovered absolutely nothing else. The medical examiner was tasked with the devastating duty of identification, comparing dental records to the remains. A single filling on a lower left molar provided the final tragic confirmation. It was Adam. The news hit John and Reeve Walsh with an unimaginable, crushing force. For 14 days, they had held on to the belief that their shy, sweet boy was out there, alive and waiting to be brought home. Now, they were forced to confront a reality so exceptionally cruel that it defies all human comprehension. They weren't just told that their beloved son was gone. They had to live with the agonizing trauma that only a small fragment of him had been returned to them. I gotta be honest with you, I cannot even begin to fathom the suffocating dark grief of a parent receiving that kind of phone call. It is a level of devastation that permanently shatters a soul. Does thinking about the sheer cruelty of that moment break your heart too? Let me know in the comments below. And if you appreciate how we handle these sensitive, important cases, please take a second to hit that subscribe button. Your support helps us keep bringing light to these stories. The search for a missing boy was tragically over. But little did they know, the hunt for a monster was about to spiral into a maddening web of lost evidence and false leads. With the tragic confirmation of Adam's death, the desperate search for a missing boy abruptly transformed into a massive, high-stakes homicide investigation. But instead of a coordinated, laser-focused manhunt, the Hollywood Police Department found themselves completely overwhelmed by an avalanche of chaotic information. Thousands of tips flooded the phone lines, sending exhausted detectives chasing down endless dead ends. The investigation quickly became a convoluted web of false leads, with desperate citizens reporting every suspicious vehicle or transient in South Florida. The sheer volume of noise was deafening, masking the sinister truth that was slipping right through their fingers. Amidst the chaos, a deeply chilling red herring emerged that still fuels intense debate today. Eyewitnesses at the mall reported seeing a strange man hanging around the toy department, and others claimed they saw a struggling child being forced into a blue delivery van. It was later discovered that one of the most notorious figures in criminal history, Jeffrey Dahmer, was living in Miami Beach at the exact same time. He was working at a local sub shop just 20 minutes away from the Hollywood Mall, and that specific sub shop utilized blue vans for their deliveries. The eerie coincidences were undeniably spine-chilling. However, when confronted by investigators years later, Dahmer flatly denied any involvement. He maintained that he had already confessed to all of his other horrifying crimes, stating he had absolutely no reason to hide this one. While the Dahmer theory clouded the narrative, the true tragedy of the investigation lay inside the walls of the police department itself. This is where the story takes a dark turn into unforgivable negligence. Eventually, detectives zeroed in on a drifter who quickly became their prime suspect. During the investigation, authorities seized his vehicle to sweep for clues. When forensic teams processed the car, they made a massive breakthrough. Using luminol, they discovered a significant, undeniable bloodstain soaked deep into the floor carpet of the vehicle. In a case built entirely on circumstantial whispers and hearsay, this stained carpet was the holy grail, the single piece of physical evidence that could definitively secure a conviction in a court of law. But what happened next is almost too infuriating to comprehend. The carpet was removed, reportedly sent out for analysis, transferred between departments, and then, inexplicably, it vanished. The police department literally lost the bloody carpet. They lost the prime suspect's vehicle records and other critical items. They lost the only tangible forensic links to the most high-profile crime in the country, effectively destroying any immediate chance of a trial. I gotta be honest with you, it is absolutely mind-boggling how a piece of evidence that crucial could just disappear into thin air. Does this level of gross incompetence make your blood boil too? Drop your take in the comments below, because the frustration is incredibly hard to stomach. Without the physical proof, prosecutors were paralyzed. The pursuit of justice was stopped dead in its tracks due to bureaucratic failure. No one could have predicted what happened next, but the agonizing wait for answers was about to take an even more twisted turn. For over 2 years, the Hollywood Police Department chased shadows. The investigation was bogged down by lost evidence, endless false leads, and the suffocating weight of a family's unresolved grief. But in October 1983, a sudden chilling breakthrough emerged from a prison cell hours away. A transient drifter named Otis Tulle, who was already incarcerated for other crimes, began speaking to investigators, and what he casually admitted to would freeze the blood in their veins. Tulle, a man with a long sinister criminal history and a notoriously low IQ, officially confessed to the abduction and murder of 6-year-old Adam Walsh. According to the police transcripts, Tulle sat in the interrogation room and calmly recounted the events of that fateful July afternoon. He claimed he had been driving his white 1971 Cadillac through the area and pulled up near the exterior doors of the Hollywood Mall. That was when he spotted a small boy in a beige captain's hat, standing entirely alone outside the Sears entrance. Adam, having just been ushered out by the security guard, was likely confused, terrified, and desperately waiting for his mother to come looking for him. This is where the story takes a dark turn, revealing the absolute true horror of a predator's mind. Tulle didn't use force to get Adam into the car. Instead, he used the oldest, most insidious trick in the book. He approached the frightened 6-year-old and lured him into the Cadillac with the simple, deceptive promise of toys and candy. Adam, a deeply shy child who was lost and seeking comfort, innocently trusted the wrong person and got into the vehicle. As Tulle drove north onto Interstate 95, heading toward Jacksonville, he noted that Adam was initially docile. The little boy likely believed this strange man was going to help him find his parents. But as the highway miles stretched on and the landscape grew unfamiliar, the devastating reality set in. Adam realized they were not going back to the mall. Panic consumed the child. He began to cry, demanding to go back to his mother. When recounting what happened next, Tulle's chilling lack of remorse deeply disturbed even the most hardened detectives. He admitted to pulling the Cadillac off the highway onto a deserted, isolated service road near the Florida Turnpike to silence the boy. Out of respect for Adam's memory and his family, we will not delve into the heartbreaking specific details of his final moments on that desolate dirt road. But Tulle's cold, emotionless description of how he ended an innocent child's life simply because the boy was crying is a level of twisted evil that is hard to comprehend. I gotta be honest with you, thinking about how easily a monster can manipulate a frightened, lost child is absolutely blood-chilling. It is the literal embodiment of every parent's worst nightmare. Does hearing how coldly he calculated this abduction make your blood boil too? Drop your take in the comments below. The confession seemed to finally bring the agonizing mystery to a close. But the nightmare was far from over, as the killer was about to unleash a twisted psychological game that would deny the family justice.
Reading the case files, it is obvious why Otis Tulle has been a key suspect in the murder of Adam Walsh for 12 years. After he was convicted of arson in a Jacksonville courtroom in 1983, Tulle said he wanted to talk about a murder he'd committed a few years ago. He told detectives he'd kidnapped a child who said his name was Adam from a Fort Lauderdale area mall. A spur-of-the-moment decision to take the child and raise the child as his own.
The confession should have been the final, definitive chapter in this agonizing saga. With Otis Tulle officially on the record, investigators and the Walsh family believed they could finally close the book, head to court, and secure the justice that 6-year-old Adam so deeply deserved. But little did they know, the nightmare was only shifting into a different, far more insidious kind of torture. Tulle was not just a transient criminal, he was an erratic, manipulative predator who thoroughly enjoyed the spotlight and reveled in holding power over law enforcement. Almost as soon as the ink dried on his confession, the sickening mind games began. In a cruel display of psychological warfare, Tulle initiated a relentless, dizzying cycle of recanting his statements. He would sit in the interrogation room, look detectives dead in the eye, and suddenly claim he had completely fabricated the entire story. He argued that he only confessed because he was bored, or because investigators had inadvertently fed him the details. At one point, he even falsely implicated his infamous partner, serial killer Henry Lee Lucas, sending desperate detectives on yet another wild goose chase, only to later backtrack and insist he acted entirely alone. Then, months later, he would flip the script again, casually readmitting to the crime, and providing unreleased facts that only the true perpetrator could possibly know. This agonizing pendulum of truth and lies inflicted immeasurable pain on John and Reeve Walsh. Every phone call from the police station was another devastating emotional whiplash. This is where the story takes a dark turn into sheer legal frustration. Despite Tulle's repeated confessions and the deep, unwavering conviction of the lead detectives, the justice system hit a massive, immovable brick wall. To formally charge someone with a high-profile murder, the state attorney's office requires concrete, physical proof to present to a jury. But because of the catastrophic negligence detailed earlier, the fact that the police department had inexplicably lost the blood-stained carpet from Tulle's Cadillac, and the suspected weapon prosecutor's hands were completely tied. Without that crucial physical evidence, any competent defense attorney could easily tear the case apart by pointing to Tulle's documented history of false confessions. The authorities were entirely paralyzed. They had their prime suspect, they had his chilling words on tape, yet they could not legally put him on trial for Adam's death. The realization that a known, self-admitted predator could slip through the cracks of justice simply because of a misplaced piece of evidence is absolutely staggering. The ultimate insult to injury came on September 15, 1996. Otis Tulle, who was already serving life sentences in a Florida state prison for other unrelated crimes, died of cirrhosis of the liver at the age of 49. He passed away quietly in a prison hospital bed, taking the absolute definitive truth of that July afternoon to his grave. With Tulle's death, the door to a criminal trial slammed shut. John and Rave Walsh were permanently stripped of the opportunity to sit in the courtroom and watch the man responsible for their family's destruction stand before a judge. They were robbed of the profound, necessary closure of a guilty verdict. I gotta be honest with you, seeing a family fight so tirelessly, only to be denied their day in court because the system fumbled the evidence, is profoundly infuriating. It feels like the ultimate betrayal of a grieving family. Drop your take in the comments. Does this monumental failure of justice make your blood boil too? The death of Otis Tulle could have been the bitter, unresolved end of this horrific story. A family permanently broken, a killer entirely unpunished, and a bureaucratic system that completely failed an innocent little boy. But John and Rave Walsh refused to let their son's legacy be defined by the darkness of the monster who took him. Instead, they took their unimaginable grief, their furious outrage, and forged it into an absolute, unstoppable weapon for change. They decided that if they couldn't save their own sweet boy, they were going to spend the rest of their lives saving everyone else's. At the time of Adam's disappearance in 1981, the United States had no national database for missing children, no coordinated communication between state police departments, and no central organization to guide terrified parents through their darkest hours. The system was fundamentally broken, so the Walshes built a new one. In 1984, channeling their profound heartbreak into fierce, relentless advocacy, they were instrumental in founding the NCMEC. This groundbreaking organization became an instant lifeline, revolutionizing how law enforcement tracks and recovers abducted youth across the country. But they didn't stop there. Knowing that Adam's nightmare began in the aisles of a crowded retail store, their tragedy inspired the creation of the highly effective Code Adam safety protocol. Today, if a child goes missing in a participating supermarket or department store, a Code Adam is announced over the intercom, immediately locking down the building and mobilizing every single employee to secure the exits. It is a brilliant, immediate response that has thwarted countless abductions before a predator could even reach the parking lot. Their relentless crusade eventually reached the highest levels of the United States government. In the summer of 2006, a monumental piece of legislation was signed into federal law, the Adam Walsh Child Protection and Safety Act. This sweeping mandate drastically expanded the National Offender Registry, severely tightened the penalties for violent crimes against youth, and gave law enforcement the robust tools they desperately needed. Because of Adam, the landscape of child safety in America was permanently transformed. Yet even with these massive national victories, a painful shadow still hung over Hollywood. The case officially remained open, serving as a haunting reminder of the botched initial investigation. Finally, on December 16, 2008, 27 agonizing years after that fateful summer day, the Hollywood Police Department held a highly emotional press conference. The chief of police stood before John and Rave Walsh and issued a formal, deeply belated apology for the department's catastrophic missteps decades earlier. More importantly, they officially closed the Adam Walsh case, definitively concluding that Otis Tulle was the sole murderer. There was no trial, but the formal public acknowledgement provided a profound sense of validation. It was an admission that the family had been right all along. Adam's life was tragically cut short at just 6 years old, but his enduring legacy is absolutely immortal. Because of a shy little boy in a beige captain's hat, Hundreds of thousands of missing children have been safely brought back home to their families. Every time a missing child alert flashes across a highway sign, or a store goes on lockdown to find a wandering toddler, that is Adam Walsh looking out for them. What started as one family's devastating nightmare birthed a movement that quite literally changed the world. Finally, after 27 years of unimaginable pain, the case was closed. Adam's tragic death wasn't in vain. He built an invisible shield around millions of children. Today I'll keep digging, if there's more to uncover. Thanks for watching, and stay safe out there.
I hope you hear her cries as you try to sleep at night. I hope you see the tears run down her face when she asked you to go home. I hope you spend the rest of your life in fear of death. You will never hurt another child again. Judge Howard, speaking for myself, for my community, and the nation, I plead with you to accept the recommendation of the jury for death as presented to you by the jury 10-2.
And for the murder of Jessica Marie Lunsford, this court sentences you, John Evander Cooey, to death.
The state of Florida never got the chance to execute Cooey. He died Wednesday of natural causes at a hospital. A Department of Corrections spokeswoman says Cooey had been ill for some time. The 51-year-old was sentenced to death in 2007 for kidnapping 9-year-old Jessica Lunsford from her bedroom in 2005 and raping and murdering her.
On a February night in 2005 in Florida, an unlocked door paved the way for a monster to snatch 9-year-old Jessica Lunsford right from her own bed. Her mysterious disappearance sparked a turbulent investigation, exposing police missteps and a suffocatingly cruel crime committed by a neighbor. Yet rising above the depths of this tragedy and a father's desperate tears, a powerful legacy was born. This is the journey of turning unimaginable pain into a legal shield that now protects millions of children across America. In the sleepy, laid-back town of Homosassa, Florida, a place where people often move to escape the fast-paced rhythm of the city, 9-year-old Jessica Marie Lunsford lived a life surrounded by profound love. Affectionately known to her family as Jessie, she was a remarkably sweet, obedient, and somewhat shy little girl. To those who knew her best, she was the ultimate daddy's girl, sharing an unbreakable bond with her single father, Mark Lunsford. They were inseparable, with Jessie often accompanying him to work, riding along on his motorcycle, and singing her favorite songs. To give her the best life possible, Mark and Jessie had moved into a quiet trailer park to live in a multi-generational home with her grandparents, Archie and Ruth. Despite her cheerful demeanor in a warm Florida environment, Jessie was a timid child who suffered from a deep, paralyzing fear of the dark, requiring multiple nightlights just to fall asleep. On the evening of February 23, 2005, the family's peaceful existence was entirely normal. Jessie attended her usual Wednesday church youth group, came home and played happily with her father before he left for a date. Her grandmother, Ruth, tucked her into bed around 10 p.m., laying out her clothes for the following day. But that quiet normalcy shattered into an unimaginable nightmare in the early hours of the morning. When Mark returned home around dawn to get ready for work, he was greeted by the relentless blaring of his daughter's alarm clock. Assuming she was just in a deep sleep, he walked into her bedroom to wake her. Instead, he found an empty bed. Panic quickly set in as Mark desperately searched every room of the trailer and then sprinted outside, screaming her name into the cool morning air, his confusion turning into sheer terror. The scene inside the house was chillingly undisturbed. There were absolutely no signs of forced entry, no shattered windows, and no indications of a violent struggle. Jessie's school clothes for the next day were still neatly laid out at the foot of her bed, completely untouched. However, Mark soon realized a horrifying detail. The front door of the trailer had been left unlocked the night before. An unknown presence had slipped in and out like a ghost in the night. The only item missing from the entire house was Jessie's prized possession, a large purple stuffed dolphin that Mark had recently won for her at the local state fair, which she had been carrying everywhere for comfort. The family knew instantly that their little girl, terrified of the dark and incredibly attached to her father, would never wander out into the black of night on her own accord. The realization that someone had taken her prompted a frantic, heart-stopping call to the authorities. The sheer desperation of that moment was captured forever in the chilling 911 recording.
Emergency? Yes, we got a child missing. How old's the child? 9. She's 9 years old? Yeah.
Operator, 911 emergency. What is your emergency? Grandmother Ruth. Yes, we have a missing child. Operator, how old is the child? Did she run away? Grandmother Ruth. She's 9 years old. No, she would never run away. She's gone. She's not here. I need help.
Can you tell me your name? Jesse. Okay, how old are you?
When a child vanishes without a trace from the supposed safety of their own home, law enforcement protocols dictate a rigid and often unforgiving starting point. According to the FBI's standard operating procedures, investigators must always focus first on ground zero, the immediate family members and those with direct physical access to the victim. Tragically, in the desperate search for 9-year-old Jessica Lunsford, this standard investigative protocol morphed into a grueling psychological ordeal for her already devastated family. Almost immediately, the investigative lens aggressively narrowed on Jessica's father, Mark Lunsford, and her grandfather, Archie. While Mark's timeline was eventually verified, the police relentlessly zeroed in on Archie, who had been asleep in the trailer that night. The foundation of their suspicion was shockingly superficial and completely disregarded the complex, unpredictable nature of human trauma. Detectives explicitly targeted the elderly grandfather simply because he did not weep, scream, or physically collapse during his intense interrogations. Because Archie internalized his agonizing fear and processed his waking nightmare with a stoic, quiet demeanor, rather than displaying visible tears, the police hastily labeled him a cold-hearted suspect, refusing to accept that grief does not always look the same. Determined to break what they believed was a wall of deception, law enforcement resorted to unimaginably cruel psychological tactics. In a deeply disturbing maneuver, investigators blatantly lied to Mark. They falsely informed the terrified father that forensic teams had discovered Jessica's blood on Archie's underwear. Their calculated goal was to completely shatter the family's trust, manipulating the vulnerable father into turning against his own dad. They forced Mark into a sterile interrogation room, effectively ordering him to act as an agent of the state and personally interrogate the man who had raised him. The resulting encounter was a heartbreaking display of a grieving family being torn apart by the very people meant to help them. Inside the cold room, the emotional toll was palpable.
They want me to ask you, Dad, if you know where Jesse's at. I'm sorry, Dad. I know you promise me. No, just forgive me. That I have to ask you.
The consequences of this misdirected focus were absolutely catastrophic. While detectives spent their time administering polygraph tests, manufacturing cruel lies, and psychologically torturing an innocent father and grandfather, the real monster was slipping through their fingers. 3 precious, irreplaceable golden days of the investigation were completely wasted on a baseless witch hunt within the family's home. In child abduction cases, the first 72 hours are universally recognized as the most critical window for bringing a victim home alive. Instead of utilizing that vital time to actively hunt down the actual predator lurking just across the street, authorities squandered at a fatal misdirection that not only compounded the family's unjust suffering, but ultimately cost Jessica her life. After 3 grueling days of intense interrogations that yielded nothing but the shattered nerves of an innocent family, authorities finally conceded that Mark and Archie Lunsford had no involvement in Jessica's disappearance. With the family officially cleared, investigators drastically shifted their focus outward, realizing they were likely dealing with a stranger abduction. The investigation gained fresh momentum when detectives re-examined the crime scene and discovered a crucial, previously overlooked detail: an L-shaped cut in a window screen on the porch of the Lunsford home. This precise burglar's cut definitively confirmed the terrifying theory that an intruder had deliberately sliced the mesh to reach in and unlock the door. Armed with the certainty of a break-in, launching a massive sweep to interview every predator living within a 3-mile radius of the Lunsford residence. Out of dozens of names, one specific individual began to stand out with chilling prominence: 46-year-old John Evander Cooey. Cooey was a transient with a disturbing criminal history, specifically including a prior conviction for molesting a child. Even more alarming, when authorities went to check his registered address, they found it abandoned. Through neighborhood canvassing, a detective discovered a horrifying truth. Cooey had actually been living off the radar with his sister in a dilapidated trailer mere steps away from the Lunsford home a terrifyingly close distance of roughly 150 yards. The realization that a convicted child predator had been secretly living right across the street sent shockwaves through the investigative team. When police descended upon the sisters' trailer, they found that Cooey had abruptly fled the area just days after Jessica vanished. This sudden, unannounced departure strongly suggested guilt. The FBI and local authorities immediately launched a frantic multi-state manhunt, releasing Cooey's mugshot to national news outlets and declaring him a primary person of interest. The intense media coverage proved vital. A few weeks into the investigation, a sharp-eyed civilian spotted a man matching Cooey's description wandering near a bus station in Augusta, Georgia, nearly 400 miles away from Homosassa. The tip led to his immediate detention by local police. Florida investigators immediately rushed to Georgia to conduct a face-to-face interrogation with the elusive suspect. Initially, Cooey maintained a cool, nonchalant demeanor, adamantly denying any knowledge of the little girl or her disappearance. Determined to break his facade, investigators requested that he take a polygraph examination. Cooey, perhaps overconfident in his ability to deceive, agreed. The test was administered by seasoned FBI Special Agent Terry Wetmore. For 2 intense hours, Wetmore analyzed Cooey's physiological responses to pointed questions about the night of February 23rd. The results were damning. The turning point of the entire manhunt occurred in the moments following the test. Agent Wetmore later recounted the chilling climax of the interrogation.
Special Agent Wetmore, after it was done, I told Mr. Cooey he had failed the test and that I knew that he had taken Jessica. John Cooey, his composure finally breaking, slumping in defeat. All right, I did it. I took her.
Following his confession, John Evander Cooey began to outline a sequence of events that shifted the investigation from uncertainty to clarity. What investigators uncovered was not just a crime of opportunity, but a series of deliberate actions that had been building before the night Jessica disappeared. Evidence later showed that he had entered the Lunsford home during the early morning hours and taken 9-year-old Jessica Lunsford from her bedroom. From there, she was moved across the street to a nearby residence where she was kept hidden. One of the most critical forensic details came from the crime scene itself. Investigators identified trace evidence that connected Jessica directly to the suspect's location. This finding suggested that preparations had been made in advance, an element that significantly changed how authorities understood the case. It was no longer seen as impulsive, but increasingly structured and intentional. Over the following days, the search effort intensified. Law enforcement expanded their presence throughout the neighborhood, conducting repeated checks and canvassing nearby homes. In a deeply troubling development, it was later confirmed that officers had entered the residence where Jessica was being held during routine checks connected to registry compliance. However, due to the limited scope of those searches, the full situation was not discovered at the time. As pressure from the investigation mounted and media coverage spread nationwide, the suspect's behavior shifted. He left the area abruptly, which later became a key indicator used by investigators to establish consciousness of guilt. This movement ultimately triggered the multi-state manhunt that led to his capture. After his arrest and under sustained questioning, Cooey provided information that led authorities to a location not far from the original abduction site. There, investigators made the devastating discovery that confirmed the outcome of the case. The trial of John Evander Cooey was a harrowing descent into the nightmare that claimed 9-year-old Jessica Lunsford. Although his defense team attempted to save him from the executioner, the prosecution presented an insurmountable mountain of irrefutable forensic evidence. The most damning piece was a bloodstain discovered on the mattress inside Cooey's squalid bedroom. DNA testing conclusively matched the blood to the missing 9-year-old victim. When combined with his desperate flight across state lines to avoid capture, and his own chilling, detailed confession, the physical evidence formed a steel trap that sealed the predator's fate beyond a reasonable doubt. The emotional crescendo of the trial arrived during the prosecution's closing arguments, delivering a shockwave of grief that reverberated throughout the courtroom, seeking to make the jury truly comprehend the sheer horror and depravity of the crime. The lead prosecutor orchestrated a visceral, heartbreaking demonstration. Holding a purple stuffed dolphin, a replica of the very toy Jessica had desperately clung to in the dark, he meticulously placed it inside a heavy black trash bag. As he tied the plastic shut in front of the horrified gallery, he described the agonizing minutes of the little girl being buried alive, struggling for air as dirt rained down upon her. The powerful reenactment left the courtroom in stunned silence, bringing several jurors to tears as the unimaginable reality of Jessica's suffocation settled over them. Yet the most powerful and devastating moment belonged to Mark Lunsford. Stepping onto the witness stand, the grieving father directed his piercing gaze straight at the monster who had stolen his world. Channeling the collective outrage and heartbreak of a shattered community, Mark delivered a searing, unforgettable statement that felt like a solemn curse upon the killer. He told Cooey that he hoped the agonizing tears and cries of his daughter would haunt his every waking moment and rob him of sleep for the rest of his miserable life. In his final, resolute plea to the judge, Mark demanded the ultimate punishment, quoting a poignant phrase to underscore the severity of the unspeakable act. "It's just too heavy, Your Honor. It's too heavy for mercy." Cooey was swiftly convicted on all 4 horrific charges, including first-degree murder, kidnapping, burglary, and aggravated, and was subsequently sentenced to death. However, the predator would never make it to the execution chamber. In September 2009, just 2 years after his conviction, the child killer succumbed to a painful battle with cancer, dying unceremoniously inside his prison cell. For Mark Lunsford, who had endured the ultimate loss, this slow, agonizing end behind bars was not an evasion of justice. Instead, he saw it as the universe balancing the scales of fitting miserable demise that the grieving father simply described as absolute karma. In the devastating aftermath of his daughter's brutal murder, Mark Lunsford found himself staring into a seemingly bottomless abyss of grief. However, rather than allowing the crushing weight of despair to consume him, the heartbroken father made a profound decision to channel his unbearable pain into a relentless crusade for justice. Recognizing that the systemic legal failures which allowed a monster like John Cooey to slip through the cracks could easily claim another innocent life, Mark sacrificed everything to ensure no other family would have to endure his waking nightmare. He abruptly quit his steady job, walking away from his normal life to dedicate his entire existence to becoming a full-time child safety activist. Embracing his passion for motorcycles, Mark took to the open highways to spread his urgent message. Clad in a leather biker jacket vividly embroidered with the smiling face of his beloved 9-year-old daughter across the back, he traveled the country tirelessly. With Jesse symbolically riding alongside him, Mark transformed from a grieving single father into a fierce, unwavering guardian for children everywhere, lobbying lawmakers and rallying communities with raw, unfiltered emotion. His passionate advocacy quickly caught the attention of politicians and the public alike, culminating in the historic creation of the Jessica Lunsford Act, commonly known as Jessica's Law. Initially drafted and passed with overwhelming support in the state of Florida, this landmark piece of legislation was specifically designed to aggressively tighten the legal leash on convicted child predators. Mark had been infuriated to learn that Cooey, a repeat offender, had been living unchecked right across the street from his family. To prevent this dangerous oversight from ever happening again, Jessica's Law mandated incredibly strict monitoring protocols. It required convicted offenders who prey on children to wear electronic GPS tracking devices for life, ensuring law enforcement always knew their exact whereabouts. Furthermore, the legislation drastically increased mandatory minimum prison sentences for child predators, stripping lenient judges of the ability to let dangerous offenders back on the streets prematurely, and enforced rigorous community alert systems to keep neighborhoods informed. One of the most critical and impactful provisions of Jessica's Law addressed a terrifying revelation uncovered during the investigation. John Cooey had previously been employed by a contractor that did part-time work at the very elementary school Jessica attended. The horrifying realization that a convicted child molester had been granted physical proximity to hundreds of vulnerable students sent shockwaves through the educational system. Consequently, the new law implemented uncompromising, stringent background checks. It mandated that any individual, whether a direct employee, a vendor, or an outside contractor who sought work on school grounds, must undergo a rigorous screening and fingerprinting process. This crucial barrier ensured that predators could no longer hide behind third-party employment to gain access to school campuses. The ripple effect of Mark Lunsford's grueling, passionate crusade extended far beyond the borders of Florida. Driven by a father's undying love and an absolute refusal to back down in the face of bureaucratic resistance, Mark traveled from state to state, standing before legislatures to plead his case. His tireless, unwavering fight resonated deeply across the nation, sparking a massive legislative movement. Today, driven by the memory of a little girl who loved the color purple and her stuffed animals, an astounding 46 states across the United States have adopted their own versions or similar rigorous provisions of Jessica's Law. Through his extraordinary resilience, Mark successfully transformed his ultimate tragedy into a monumental legal shield, cementing a legacy that continues to protect millions of children. As the calendar turned to February 2025, marking the solemn 20-year anniversary of Jessica Lunsford's tragic death, a profound shift occurred in how her story was told. For 2 decades, the narrative had been intrinsically linked to the gruesome, heartbreaking details of a horrific crime that shook the nation to its core. However, on this significant milestone, the media, the community, and her family made a conscious decision to change the conversation. Instead of dwelling on the darkness of the monster who stole her away, the focus turned toward the brilliant, endearing legacy she left behind. For Mark Lunsford, who had spent the last 20 years fighting relentlessly in his daughter's name, this anniversary was not just a day of mourning, but a celebration of monumental change. The tragedy had birthed a powerful movement, proving that even in the face of unimaginable evil, profound good can emerge and flourish. Beyond the sweeping legislative victories of Jessica's Law, her legacy materialized in highly tangible, deeply compassionate ways, most notably through the creation of Jesse's Place. Before this groundbreaking initiative, children who had survived unspeakable cruelty were subjected to a traumatizing, bureaucratic nightmare. They were often dragged from the intimidating clinical environment of police station interrogation rooms to cold hospital wards for physical examinations, and then shuttled off to separate facilities for psychological therapy. This fragmented process forced traumatized victims to recount their horrors repeatedly in uncomfortable settings. Jesse's Place revolutionized this agonizing ordeal by establishing a centralized one-stop children's advocacy center. Designed specifically as a comforting, child-friendly safe haven, the center consolidates law enforcement investigators, medical professionals, and specialized trauma therapists under one welcoming roof. Here, traumatized children can find solace, receive comprehensive care, and begin their fragile journey toward healing without being subjected to further systemic trauma. It stands as a living tribute to Jessica's gentle spirit, ensuring that the most vulnerable are treated with the utmost dignity and compassion. The profound impact of Jessica's life also echoes through the very halls of the institution sworn to protect the public. Inside the Citrus County Sheriff's Office, a beautiful and poignant memorial known as the Tree of Life proudly adorns the wall. Each leaf on this magnificent tree represents the collaborative efforts of various agencies and volunteers who rallied together during the darkest hours of the investigation. More importantly, the memorial serves as a permanent visual anchor for the law enforcement officers who walk past it every single day. It acts as a solemn daily reminder of exactly why they wear the badge, why strict child protection safeguards must be fiercely upheld, and what is truly at stake. The Tree of Life ensures that the innocents lost will never be forgotten, transforming a symbol of grief into a perpetual beacon of duty and vigilance. Although Jessica Lunsford's earthly life was brutally cut short at just 9 years old, her radiant spirit defied the grave. She has transcended her tragic fate to become a guardian angel for millions of children across the United States. Through the laws enacted and the safe havens built in her name, she continues to shield the innocent from the shadows. For Mark Lunsford, the agonizing journey from a desperate, grieving father to a nationwide hero has ultimately brought him to a place of quiet peace. He no longer carries the suffocating weight of anger. Instead, he carries the enduring warmth of his daughter's love. In moments of quiet reflection, Mark finds comfort in talking aloud to himself, knowing that the comforting voice echoing back in his heart is the spirit of his sweet Jessie forever present, forever guiding him, and walking beside him for the rest of his days.
Did you see a skull, a human skull, a small human skull?
I was never closer than 20 to 30 feet from the object, and I did see something that appeared to me to look like something of that nature. Yes, sir.
Crunk says he called authorities several times by way of dispatch and a crime line to report a suspicious find while relieving himself in August 2008.
Hi, sweetie. Hi, Mom. How are you feeling? We're not doing well, kids. None of us. Dad's blown up at the media. Yeah, I heard. Well, someone just said that Kayla was dead this morning, that she drowned in the pool. That's the newest story out there. Surprise, surprise.
And bent over in grief. A newly released prison video shows a grainy image of Casey Anthony as she learned a child's body had been discovered in a swamp near her parents' Orlando home. In the 3 months since Anthony's release, she's become a different kind of prisoner. forced into hiding due to threats from a public that largely believed she was guilty. And though cleared of murder, Anthony's legal troubles are far from over.
How could a mother go out partying all night and get a beautiful life tattoo while the body of her 2-year-old daughter was decomposing in a swamp less than a mile from home? In 2008, America was rocked by the disappearance of little Kaylee Anthony. But what ignited absolute global outrage was not just the tragic death of a child, but the sickening web of lies spun by her own mother, Casey Anthony. This is not simply a murder case. This is the most perfect act of psychological manipulation in judicial history, where justice was blindfolded by lies. How do you measure a mother's love? For most, it is a fierce, unyielding instinct to protect. But in the summer of 2008, the world witnessed an entirely different, chilling metric. At the heart of the Anthony family was Kaylee, a bright, beautiful 2-year-old girl who was the absolute center of her grandparents' universe. That loving universe was shattered when her 22-year-old mother, Casey Anthony, abruptly left the family home, with the toddler in tow, claiming she was on a business trip. Casey vanished. For weeks, George and Cindy Anthony begged to see their granddaughter. Each time, Casey fed them an elaborate web of excuses. What happened next is a descent into a sick, unfathomable reality. For 31 agonizing days, Kaylee was entirely unaccounted for. Yet, while any normal parent would be tearing the world apart, paralyzed by the terror of a missing child, Casey was busy crafting her idea of a perfect life. In the dark shadow of her daughter's disappearance, the young mother moved in with a new boyfriend. She spent her days shopping, getting a new back tattoo, entering a hot body contest at a local nightclub, and partying relentlessly into the early morning hours. Not once did she exhibit a shred of panic. Not once did she pick up a phone to alert the authorities. It was a 31-day masterclass in cold, calculating apathy. The sickening truth only began to surface through a twisted stroke of fate. In mid-July, George Anthony received a notice that the car he had lent his daughter had been abandoned and towed to an impound lot. When George arrived to retrieve the vehicle, he was hit by a physical wall of horror. Having previously worked in law enforcement, he instantly recognized the overpowering putrid stench seeping from the trunk. It was the unmistakable, lingering scent of human decomposition. Inside the dark trunk, amid scattered pieces of trash, lay Kaylee's favorite toy bag. This nightmare culminated in a 911 call that remains one of the most disturbing recordings in true crime history. A stark, horrifying contrast between a grandmother's absolute despair and a mother's chilling detachment.
Hi. What can you tell me what's going on a little bit? I'm sorry? Can you tell me a little bit what's going on? My daughter's been missing for the last 31 days. And you know who has her? I know who has her. I've tried to contact her. I actually received a phone call today, now from a number that is no longer in service. I did get to speak to my daughter for about a minute. Okay, did you guys call and report a vehicle stolen? Yes. And you last saw her a month ago? 31 days. From 31 days. Who has her? Do you have a name? Her name is Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez. Who is that? Babysitter? She's been my nanny for about 1.5 years, almost 2 years. And why are you calling now? Why didn't you call 31 days ago? I've been looking for her and have gone through other resources to try to find her, which is stupid. Okay. Can you give me the name of the nanny again? Like, spell it out for me? Zenaida, Z-E-N.
When Casey finally took the phone, the air in the room seemed to freeze completely.
I've been looking for her myself. I was just afraid that if I called the police, Zenaida would hurt her.
I lied. But no one asked.
The human brain is
why.
biologically hardwired to panic when a child is in danger. But what happens when a mother's mind is entirely devoid of that fundamental empathy? As the police launched a frantic, full-scale investigation into the disappearance of 2-year-old Kaylee, they found themselves not on a rescue mission, but trapped inside the twisted sociopathic labyrinth of Casey Anthony's mind. When first questioned by seasoned detectives, Casey did not hesitate. She didn't stumble over her words, avoid eye contact, or break down in the hysterical tears of a grieving mother. Instead, she coolly constructed a flawless, hyper-detailed narrative. She provided the investigators with the exact identity of the alleged kidnapper, a nanny named Zenaida Zanny Fernandez Gonzalez. She recounted the specific apartment complex where Zanny lived, detailed her working hours, and confidently named the mutual co-worker who had introduced them years ago. It was a story so meticulously layered with intricate specifics that it seemed impossible to fabricate on the spot. But the illusion shattered the moment law enforcement attempted to verify her claims. Detectives rushed to the apartment where Casey insisted she dropped Kaylee off every single morning. The landlord met them with a baffling truth. The unit had been completely vacant for over 5 months, and no one named Zenaida had ever lived on the property. The web of deceit unraveled further when police interrogated Casey's closest circle of friends. A chilling reality emerged: not a single person in her life had ever heard of a nanny. Kaylee was always by her mother's side. The elaborate abduction story was nothing but a ghost. The absolute climax of this psychological manipulation occurred the following morning. In a move that continues to baffle criminal behaviorists today, Casey voluntarily offered to lead 3 veteran detectives to her office at Universal Studios to speak with the coworkers she claimed were involved. For 25 excruciating minutes, she confidently marched the investigators past tourists and through winding corridors. She led them deep into an administrative building, marching down a long hallway until they finally reached a dead end with nowhere left to go.
Okay. To an office that you don't have. We got all the way into the building, into the hallway out here before you finally says, well, I really don't have an office here. But up till then, we were walking to your office, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so I mean, does any of this make sense to you?
I understand how all of that sounds.
No. Here's the problem with that, though. Okay? You can carry the weight of this around for a long time. It's not going to get any easier, okay? What he's trying to tell you right now, I'm going to tell you, you know, in the amount of time that I've done this, almost 30 years now, okay? I've learned this. People make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. The 3 of us have all made some mistakes in our lives. We've done some things we're not proud of, okay? But then there comes a point in time, you either own up to it, you say you're sorry, you try to get past it, or you lie about it, and you bury it, and you lie about it, and you bury it, and you lie about it, and you bury it, and it just never, ever, 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 ever goes away.
This wasn't a desperate lie born out of fear or panic. It was the calculated, effortless performance of a pathological liar. It laid bare a terrifying sociopathic nature, a woman who would rather lead police on a theatrical wild goose chase than save her own flesh and blood. For 5 grueling months, the desperate search for Kaylee Anthony captivated and horrified the globe. The investigation quickly devolved into a suffocating national media circus, with massive search parties scouring the state and the public clinging to the fragile, fading hope that the 2-year-old might still be found alive. But the tragic truth wasn't hidden in some distant city or with a phantom nanny. It was waiting in the murky, snake-infested waters of a wooded swamp on Suburban Drive, less than a single mile away from the very bed where the toddler used to safely sleep. In December 2008, the agonizing mystery finally broke, though not through the efforts of a multi-million-dollar police task force. It was a local utility meter reader, Roy Kronk, who stumbled upon a suspicious submerged gray trash bag in the desolate woods. Kronk had actually reported the foul-smelling bag multiple times over the preceding months, but his urgent warnings were tragically brushed aside by law enforcement. It wasn't until his final, desperate phone call that the horrifying reality could no longer be ignored.
One of the trees was a gray vinyl-like bag, like a pool cover or something like that. And it looked rather suspicious. I didn't touch anything.
2 deputies responded to the area in mid-August but found nothing. It wasn't until months later, on December 13th, that Crunk called 911 after a gruesome discovery.
I was standing behind it, so I was looking at it from behind, and I still didn't think it was real. So I very gently took it and put it into the right eye socket, and I gently pivoted it up, and I looked down, and I realized what it was, and I set it down as gently as I could and went up and called my area supervisor.
Deputies would later uncover tiny bones next to that tiny skull, tossed away like trash in garbage bags.
When crime scene investigators finally waded into the dark muck, the absolute horror of the physical evidence brought seasoned detectives to tears. Inside the rotting canvas bag, the skeletal remains of little Kaylee were found heartbreakingly swaddled in her favorite Winnie the Pooh blanket, a stark, agonizing contrast between childhood innocence and absolute evil. But the most chilling, damning detail of all was the piece of silver duct tape still clinging to the toddler's decomposed skull, positioned directly over where her small mouth and nose had once been. This gruesome discovery was the final, devastating puzzle piece that connected a terrifying trail of digital and physical evidence. Forensics had already isolated a single strand of hair in the trunk of Casey's car, exhibiting root banding, a microscopic phenomenon that exclusively occurs when hair falls from a decomposing corpse. Furthermore, computer forensics unveiled a deeply sinister digital footprint. In the days immediately leading up to Kaylee's disappearance, someone on Casey's computer had actively scoured the internet, searching for how to make chloroform and researching clinical methods for foolproof suffocation. It yielded the darkest, most terrifying evidence of a meticulously researched and cold-blooded murder. As the horrifying details of Kaylee's demise seeped into the public consciousness, the tragedy quickly mutated into a ferocious, unprecedented media circus. The trial of Casey Anthony wasn't just a legal proceeding. It became a global obsession, broadcasted live to millions of outraged viewers around the clock. News anchors practically screamed her name from their desks, and protesters lined the streets outside the Orange County Courthouse, wielding signs demanding brutal justice. Almost overnight, Casey was universally branded with a grim, inescapable title, the most hated woman in America. The sheer scale of the public vitriol created a logistical nightmare for the justice system. The hatred was so visceral, so widespread, that finding an impartial jury locally was deemed entirely impossible. To ensure a fair trial, the judge was forced to take extreme measures, importing 12 jurors from a completely different county and strictly isolating them. For 6 grueling weeks, these men and women were entirely sequestered, locked away in a hotel, stripped of their cell phones, their television access heavily monitored, and completely cut off from the outside world. They were thrust into a vacuum, tasked with deciding the fate of a woman the entire country had already convicted in the court of public opinion. When the trial finally commenced, the prosecution wasted no time painting a chilling, uncompromising portrait of the defendant. They didn't just argue how Kaylee died, they meticulously unraveled why. The state presented a motive so profoundly selfish and cruel that it defied the very essence of human nature, let alone motherhood. According to the lead prosecutors, Casey Anthony did not view her vibrant 2-year-old daughter as a blessing to be cherished. Instead, Kaylee was a tether and inconvenient heavy burden standing between a narcissistic 22-year-old girl and her desperate desire for absolute, unchecked freedom. The prosecution argued that Casey was intoxicated by the allure of the Orlando nightlife, infatuated with a new club promoter boyfriend, and desperate to live out the Italian phrase she had freshly tattooed on her shoulder while her child lay dead in a swamp. Bella Vita, the beautiful life. They posited that the murder wasn't a tragic accident or a fleeting moment of panic. It was a cold, calculated execution. In the eyes of the state, Casey deliberately suffocated her own flesh and blood, trading her child's life for endless nights of drinking, dancing, and reckless abandon. Because of the sickening premeditation and the sheer callousness of dumping her child in the woods like garbage, the state declared they would not settle for mere prison time. They looked the jury dead in the eye and demanded the ultimate irrevocable punishment, the death penalty. If you are captivated by the dark psychology behind cases like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Here at Crime Evidence, we dissect the most twisted minds in criminal history to bring you unparalleled deep dive analyses. Don't miss Part 5, where we expose the shocking courtroom twist that changed everything. The prosecution had seemingly built an airtight case backed by a mountain of circumstantial evidence, digital footprints, and the undeniable stench of death. Facing what many legal analysts considered an impossible, unwinnable battle was defense attorney Jose Baez. Baez knew that attempting to simply deny the physical evidence, the chloroform searches, the root-banded hair, the lies to the police would be a fatal error. Instead of fighting the state on their own terms, Baez unleashed a courtroom bombshell that sent shockwaves through the nation. He didn't just deny the murder, he entirely rewrote the narrative, deploying a psychological masterstroke deliberately designed to fracture the jury's certainty. When Baez stood before the sequestered jury to deliver his opening statement, he dropped a staggering revelation that paralyzed the courtroom. Kaylee was never missing. He posited a deeply unsettling conspiracy theory that flipped the entire premise of the trial upside down. According to the defense team, There was no premeditated murder, no homemade chloroform, and no brutal suffocation. Instead, on the morning of June 16, 2008, little Kaylee slipped out of the house, fell into the family's backyard swimming pool, and tragically drowned. It was framed as a heartbreaking freak accident, but an accidental drowning alone could not explain the rotting body in the swamp or the duct tape across the child's skull. For that, Baez needed a scapegoat. To make the twisted puzzle pieces fit, the defense aimed their crosshairs directly at the grieving grandfather, George Anthony. Baez claimed it was George, a former law enforcement officer, who discovered Kaylee's lifeless body floating in the water. Panic-stricken, enraged, and terrified that Casey would be sent to prison for child neglect, George allegedly took matters into his own hands. According to this shocking narrative, it was the grandfather who hid the truth, wrapped the child's body, applied the duct tape to stage a sinister kidnapping, and ultimately dumped his own granddaughter in the nearby swamp. But a glaring question remained. How could Baez explain Casey's bizarre, cold-blooded behavior? How could he justify her 31 days of relentless partying, her endless web of lies to detectives, and her chilling lack of maternal emotion? To answer this, Baez unleashed the darkest, most treacherous twist of the entire proceeding. He publicly accused George Anthony of severely sexually abusing Casey since she was just 8 years old. The defense painted a grim, suffocating picture of a household built on dark, unspeakable secrets. Baez argued that enduring years of horrific trauma had fundamentally broken Casey's psyche, forcing her to develop a deeply ingrained psychological defense mechanism. The defense claimed that since childhood, Casey had been conditioned by her abuser to suppress her trauma, to smile through immense pain, and to compulsively lie to maintain the illusion of a perfect, happy family. When Kaylee allegedly drowned, Casey simply reverted to her lifelong coping mechanism. She retreated into a dissociative fantasy world, acting as though nothing had happened because confronting the horrific reality and her abusive father was psychologically impossible. She partied and lied not because she was a sociopathic killer, but because she was a severely traumatized victim, operating on autopilot. This ruthless courtroom strategy effectively put George Anthony on trial alongside his daughter. The world watched in stunned silence as a devastated grandfather, already broken by the horrific loss of his beloved Kaylee, and a recent suicide attempt, was publicly annihilated on the witness stand. He vehemently denied the vile allegations, his face etched with absolute soul-crushing despair as his own daughter sat feet away. Yet the damage was already done. The defense had successfully weaponized familial trauma, transforming the trial from a pursuit of justice into a toxic, chaotic spectacle of doubt and destruction. After 6 grueling weeks of highly emotional, deeply disturbing testimony, the fate of Casey Anthony finally rested in the hands of 12 exhausted, sequestered jurors. The prosecution had meticulously constructed a morally infuriating narrative, backed by a staggering mountain of circumstantial evidence, suspicious digital footprints, and the undeniable scent of human decomposition. However, the American justice system hinges entirely on one absolute unforgiving pillar: the burden of proof. And it was here that the prosecution's seemingly airtight case harbored a fatal, unavoidable flaw. While the state could definitively prove that Casey was a pathological liar, a callous mother, and a woman who ruthlessly partied while her daughter was missing, they lacked the most critical element required for a homicide conviction: a definitive, medically proven cause of death. Because little Kaylee's remains had been left to rot in the unforgiving watery muck of a Florida swamp for nearly 6 months, nature had effectively destroyed the evidence. The medical examiner could only rule the tragic death a homicide by undetermined means. Without soft tissue, there was no conclusive scientific proof of chloroform use, no definitive sign of suffocation, and no direct physical evidence placing Casey's hands on the murder weapon. The prosecution was asking the jury to bridge the gap with logic and common sense, but legally, the gap was vast. Defense attorney Jose Baez recognized this scientific void and masterfully exploited it. He understood that he didn't actually need to prove that Kaylee accidentally drowned in the family pool, nor did he need to prove the horrific allegations he waged against George Anthony. His only objective was to plant a lingering seed of hesitation. In a criminal court, a defendant must be proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Baez hammered this legal standard into the jury's minds relentlessly, arguing that if the state could not definitively prove how the child died, it was legally and morally impossible to sentence her mother to death. The jury, completely isolated from the public's furious consensus and confined strictly to the letter of the law, stepped right into Baez's psychological trap. The chaotic alternative theories, combined with the lack of direct forensic evidence, created the exact threshold of reasonable doubt needed to dismantle the prosecution's entire case. On the afternoon of July 5, 2011, a suffocating tension blanketed the Orlando courtroom. Millions around the globe were glued to their television screens, bracing for a swift and severe conviction. As the clerk stood to read the verdicts, the unthinkable happened. Count 1, first-degree murder, not guilty. Count 2, aggravated child abuse, not guilty. Inside the courtroom, Casey Anthony gasped, her shoulders shaking as she wept tears of overwhelming relief. The prosecutors sat frozen, their faces etched in sheer disbelief, while investigating officers stormed out of the room in disgust. But outside the courthouse walls, the reaction was instantly explosive. As the acquittals echoed across the nation, the massive crowd gathered on the streets erupted into absolute, unbridled fury. Chants of justice for Kaylee and deafening angry boos pierced the air. The globe watched in collective horror and outrage, fundamentally convinced they had just witnessed a mother literally get away with murder. The shocking acquittal of Casey Anthony did not merely break the hearts of millions. It fundamentally shattered the public's faith in the American judicial system. However, the collective fury of a traumatized watching nation demanded that Kaylee's tragic, painfully short life ignite some form of meaningful, lasting change. In the immediate wake of the devastating verdict, an eruption of public outrage birthed a fierce legislative movement. The powerful result was Kaylee's Law, a vital piece of legislation enacted across multiple states that officially made it a felony offense for a parent or legal guardian to fail to report a missing or deceased child in a timely manner. While the stroke of a governor's pen could never bring the vibrant 2-year-old back to life, the law stood as a solemn, enduring vow to the country. It ensured that no mother would ever again be allowed to legally mask the disappearance of her child behind a 31-day wall of deafening silence and cold apathy. Despite facing unprecedented global condemnation, Casey Anthony walked out of the Orange County Jail just 10 short days after the verdict was read. She had only been convicted of 4 minor misdemeanor counts for providing false information to law enforcement, and with credit for the 3 years she had already served awaiting trial, she was thrust back into the free world. Stepping out into the blinding Florida sun under heavy police escort, Casey quickly set about erasing the remnants of her shattered past. She permanently severed all communication with her family, leaving behind the very parents whose lives, minds, and reputations had been thoroughly destroyed to secure her freedom. In a heavily symbolic, almost mocking gesture, she eventually covered her infamous Bella Vita shoulder tattoo with a large floral mandala, attempting to bury the visual reminder of the nights she spent partying while her child lay dead. Yet, in a bizarre and deeply unsettling twist of fate, she did not retreat into complete obscurity. Casey remained freely in South Florida, eventually finding a comfortable living working as an investigative assistant for Patrick McKenna, the very same private investigator who had served as the lead on her own defense team. Living without a shred of visible remorse, she casually insists in rare media appearances that she sleeps perfectly well at night. As the dust finally settles on what was dubbed the trial of the century, the Casey Anthony case remains a chilling historical testament to the impotence of the legal system when confronted with the dark artistry of manipulation. The rigid architecture of criminal law, built on the absolute necessity of physical proof, was masterfully bypassed by a pathological liar who understood that a well-crafted shadow of doubt is far more powerful than the blinding light of truth. In a courtroom where the most crucial physical evidence was left to rot away in a swamp, justice was ultimately rendered blindfolded, bound, and gagged by courtroom theatrics. The deepest, most agonizing pain of this tragedy does not belong to the woman who effortlessly walked free. It belongs to a completely shattered grandfather, a man who once tried to end his own life because he could not bear the suffocating weight of the monstrous fabricated accusations hurled at him to save his daughter's skin. But above all, the eternal tragedy belongs to little Kaylee Marie Anthony. The ultimate truth of what truly happened on that fateful summer afternoon remains hopelessly trapped in a dark, impenetrable void suspended forever between a 2-year-old child who can no longer speak and a mother who will never stop lying.